Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Wokingham Borough Council Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, the 31st of January 2023. My name is Andrew Mickleborough. I'm chairing this evening and I'm assisted by Shirley Boyt as Vice Chair. Just before we move into the agenda, regular attendees will notice a number of new faces who are always very, very welcome indeed. I would particularly like to welcome Holly McKinnon, Wokingham Borough Youth MP. I would like to welcome Richard Lammy, Church of England representative who's joining the committee. You're most welcome, Richard. David Gussey, presenting on the Berkshire West Safeguarding Children Partnership. If we can move on to the agenda now. Oh, sorry, and also Terry Walsh, okay, the participation lead for Send Voices, who will be assisting with items 49 and 50. Councillor Howe has suggested that that the regular members of this committee briefly and quickly introduce themselves. Okay, myself and Shirley can be exempt from that. Okay, so if we start off with Anne.
So, sorry, I'm Anne Chadwick. I'm a Wokingham Borough Councillor for Loddon Ward in Woodley.
Hi, I'm Sarah Clark and I'm Chair of Send Voices Woking and I'm a community member of the committee.
Graham Howe and I'm Shadow for Children's Services.
I'm Morag Malvern, who's an Embrook Liberal Democrat representative.
Hello, I'm Pauline Hellier-Simons and I represent the ward called Wokingham Without, which is right in the very south of the borough.
Okay, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dess and I work in Children's Services at Wokingham Council.
And
I'm not a member of the committee. I'm Prue Bray. I'm the lead member for Children's Services and I come to be answerable to you.
Okay, Ming. Good, you're muted, Ming, but you're most welcome, okay, this evening, okay. Adam.
Evening, Adam Davis. I'm the Assistant Director at Children's Social Care in Wokingham.
Sal.
Good evening, I'm Sal Thirlway. I'm the Assistant Director for Learning, Achievement and Partnerships in Children's Services.
Thanks, Sal. Zoe.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Zoe Story. I'm the School Admissions and Transport Manager.
Good, Gillian.
Good evening, colleagues. Gillian Cole, Service Manager for Schools.
Thank you, Gillian. Jamie.
Hi, everyone. I'm the new Head of Send.
Wonderful. You're most welcome, Jamie. And have I missed anybody out?
Yes, me.
Oh, sorry. And Helen, of course.
Hello, Helen Watson, Interim Director of Children's Services. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Beth Rowland, member for Woodley South Lake.
Okay. Have I missed anybody? Good. Okay. Right. That's all your fault, Graham. Thank you. Okay. Now, moving on to the agenda. Do we have any apologies? Good. Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting were on the 22nd of November 2022. Do we have a proposer and seconder to accept these as a true and accurate record? We need a proposer and a seconder. Okay. Proposed by Shirley, seconded by Morag. Okay. Those of us who were at that meeting in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. Okay. Were there any matters arising from those minutes that will not be dealt with later in this meeting? Good, and I will sign the minutes after this meeting. Any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Any questions from members of the public? Any questions submitted by members? Thank you. Good. So that takes us to item number 47, the Youth Council update. Thank you, Holly.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Holly. Thank you so much for having me at the meeting today. I'm really excited to be here representing Woking Youth Council. So I'm just going to spend like 7 minutes talking about what our plans are for the next 12 months. But I thought I'd keep it short so that we've got a bit more time for questions that I can give more tailored responses. So as I'm sure Sarah might have mentioned, our main focus for this year is youth engagement in politics. So informing young people about political systems and issues that affect them and encouraging them to get involved in the local community and wider political issues. So as part of this, on Thursday, the 23rd of February, we're hosting a Youth for Politics event where we've invited Sir John Redwood MP to speak about his political career. And we've got a panel discussion with local councillors to give young people an idea about the stances of different parties operating within the council and also their views on specific issues nominated by young people. So we're going to elect those later on in the Youth Council, but issues that we'll probably be talking about will be the cost of living crisis, lowering the voting age, climate change, mental health. So quite broad issues, but just giving young people an idea about the more specific UK focus on that, because I think in the curriculum there is quite limited education about that. So we were really interested in exploring that further. Also, further down the line, we're really interested in securing a place in the Borough newsletter or a similar publication as a column for Woking Youth Council to run for young people in the borough. So this could be youth council members giving updates on projects that we're running, or potentially a journalistic opportunity for young people in the borough to submit articles that they've written, maybe within schools as like competitions, or perhaps on a chosen topic by the Youth Council. So our theme could be climate change in Woking, and then young people can submit their thoughts and views on maybe how the Borough Council could improve, or just like their opinions on that topic, to give young people just another way of expressing their voice in Woking. And both of these projects are running into our long kind of 12-month plan of perhaps in a year or so, organising a youth summit in Woking. So that's a day of interactive talks, workshops and debates for young people kind of within the school day from schools to like engage on issues that matter to them. So we'd partner with different charity organisations from the local area, running workshops, educating young people, but also as a chance for young people to like get up and talk to each other, work with students from different schools, because that's something I've noticed that there's like not that much of, is collaboration between schools. And the aim of the event would be to educate and inspire young people to get involved in combating the issues that they care about. Schools and youth groups could get involved, and we'd really like to work with the Borough Council on this in the future. So obviously this is really up in the air and it is just an idea at the moment, but I'd be really keen to see how we can collaborate to turn this idea into a reality. And like a more tangible thing that we're doing with Youth for Politics is just within our Woking Youth Council meetings in the future, we're running debate sessions similar to the House of Commons debate that Youth Parliament did back in November, just to allow members to not only develop their public speaking, but also to get to know each other a bit better on like where we stand with different issues. So just like on the same kind of thought as the Youth for Politics event. So on kind of a separate strand of thought, over the last few meetings, we've had agenda items from representatives from the Borough Council on topics like domestic violence, recycling and the waste management scheme within Woking. And we've been really grateful actually for the opportunity to engage with the Borough Council on these, and we've really felt like our voice has been listened to. So I just wanted to reiterate that we're really keen for any consultation opportunities with the Borough Council and like to continue this process of feedback, because that is why Woking Youth Council was originally set up, to give feedback to the council on its strategies and plans. So any way that we can continue this would be really welcome. So yeah, we're always open to doing consultations and also to like explore this further on how we could be involved in projects that the Borough Council are running that maybe aren't necessarily centred around young people, but just to make sure that the work that the council are doing is like really inclusive of like all ages, and also to give young people in the youth council and maybe from schools an experience of how the Borough Council operates, because I know from my perspective, until I actually became involved with the youth council and with youth parliament, I had no idea really of how local government worked, how the Borough Council operated. So I think providing that opportunity to young people could be really good for like career ideas and just like further political education that is like non-partisan and like impartial. So yeah, that's kind of the end of my speech. but I'm really keen to like continue the dialogue and how we can work together to build a better Wokingham for young people. So now I'd like to open it up to any questions about like what I've said now, or kind of about the general youth council and how we work. So yeah, feel free to shout out.
I'll get to the first 3 or 4 people. People can just raise their hands. Okay, Helen. Right. Okay, well, Holly. Okay, and Pauline. Okay, your first question.
Thank you. It's a super presentation. Well done. There's some fantastic ideas there. I was particularly interested that you want to have a contribution to the Borough News. I think that's a brilliant idea. I wish I'd thought of it. Well done.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to that? Maybe like further ideas?
Yes, columns for the local newspapers, I think would be very, very well received, indeed. So any other thoughts on that issue?
Focus today, aren't we? A lot of members, some of the members of council get the opportunity to write in the article in the Wokingham paper. They have a Wokingham paper article called From the Chamber. And I think that would be a good spot for you to perhaps write some articles. You need to contact Phil Crichton at the Wokingham Today.
Perfect, thank you.
From our youth. Yeah, excellent. Okay, any other thoughts on that particular issue?
Yes.
Okay, Prue.
I thought the borough newsletter doesn't come out very often, but what we do as a borough council is send out emails to residents who sign up for them. And I'm thinking that a piece in one of those emails would be quite a good thing to do. And they come out weekly, I think, even some of them. So that would be something. Maybe we can make a note to get Dave Allen to think about how to do that.
Any other thoughts on that communication? No? Okay, Graham.
Just add one little thing to let you know what I think the significance of your communications are. So we've got 66 schools across Wokingham, 10 of which are secondary, 54 which are primary schools. And by my calculations, I can't remember how many children. Do you know, Prue? Helen, help me. But it's a significant cohort of the borough. And I think that it's worth pointing that out in one of your articles and indeed in the supporting adult articles.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. On a different theme, Helen?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. I just wanted to highlight what I've heard that was extremely positive in terms of the contribution of the Youth Council into the visioning event last night. I gather that the young people who were there really engaged, and that was positively commented on. I suppose I would like to raise a slightly different issue, and it links to the next agenda item where we've got David speaking in terms of safeguarding and the safeguarding partnership. A thought for the Youth Council, would you be interested in engaging in some further discussions across the 3 local authorities who are involved in the Berkshire West Safeguarding Children Partnership around how we could look at some type of independent young scrutineer type activity? Because we know that's an area where we need to develop. And I don't know, David, if you're going to refer to that later, but just thought you're here. Let's Holly's here, so let's engage.
Yeah, I'd love to engage with you on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's a really interesting suggestion, but if we could perhaps come back to that when we discuss the next agenda item, and we may well wish to make a recommendation, on that. Okay. You did mention, Helen, a visioning event last night. It might be helpful if you could just very brief. Oh, if Holly, yeah, did you attend that?
No, I was actually ill yesterday, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But no, it's brilliant to hear that the members were able to contribute. She could have been there.
Okay, Helen, could you perhaps elaborate briefly?
I'm afraid it would be third hand as I wasn't there. Sarah, Sarah, if you're happy to say something, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a really, really nice event to all kind of come together, and it was kind of, lots of people across different sectors coming together to try, and envision what the borough would look like in 20, 30 years' time. And so obviously having our young people there was amazing, because these are the people who are going to be, hopefully if they stay in the borough, going to be experiencing it. And so we had a few opportunities to kind of write newspaper headlines, like predicting what we wanted in the future, and kind of going over what was really great about Wokingham now. And I know the young people in Wokingham, they really love it. They love how safe it is. They love how kind of the big sense of community that it has. And so, I think the main, when we had a chance to write our newspaper articles, the main topics that our young people wanted to cover was the climate crisis, and kind of reducing the impact of poverty, and then also kind of working on youth facilities for the borough. Those are the kind of main ideas that were discussed there.
Good, and you're clearly very positive about last night's event as well, Sarah. So that's
it was
really
amazing.
Lovely. Yeah, Sal, you had your hand up, and then we'll come to Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Holly, that was a really good presentation. Thank you very much for that. One of the things you mentioned was about wanting to engage more with schools. We produce, or Gillian's team produces a newsletter that goes out to schools each week. So if there are messages that Youth Council wants to get out to all head teachers, there's another avenue or another option for you there. We'd be more than happy to support that.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Richard, can I put you on the spot? Do you have any thoughts about any methods of communication, modes of communication that you might be aware of, that haven't been discussed or raised this evening?
There's a shortage of social media mentioned so far. So I think the social media, various platforms are pretty useful. And I would echo last night was brilliant. It was so, I was there at the consultation as well. And it was just so exciting to have that chance to step back from the day-to-day stuff and actually think, what do we want the borough to be in 15 years? And those headlines, there's some commonality, but also a lot of range as well about housing, green space. And one of the headlines was last food bank closes because everyone's worked together. That sense of partnership was amazing.
Excellent. Okay, Graham and then Pauline.
Holly, you've outlined a number of very good objectives and ambitions for the Youth Council, and that's fantastic. But we're coming to the end of Panto season now. So if you were the fairy with the magic wand, what are the two things that you want this group to carry away tonight?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I had just had to think about it for a second. I think my thing number one would be like working with the Youth Council to involve us in projects that aren't youth centred. I think that's like probably my biggest thing, because often like things like waste and recycling and stuff, they may not seem like issues that young people necessarily care about, but actually when we've had items in the Youth Council like doing that, the passion has like been really evident that loads of young people do really care about that. So I think just considering like if there's a strategy that you're like considering to implement, maybe thinking, oh, maybe how can we involve the Youth Council in this before we implement it? Or is there a consultation that we could run just to make sure that we're really involved? Yeah.
Thank you, Graham. Pauline, you had your hand up again? No? Okay, Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And a couple of quick sort of more basic questions, really. I just wondered how many members are there on the Youth Council?
So there's about 20, but it does vary from meeting to meeting because we have quite a lot of people coming and going depending on exams.
And are all senior schools in the borough represented?
So we started off actually with having really good representation from all schools, but that has actually dwindled quite a bit. And I'd say we probably have representatives from about 5 of the secondary schools in Woking Borough at the moment. So that is actually coming back to your point about like the two things. That is one thing that I'd like to see actually is potentially a bit more involvement from all of definitely the secondary schools in the borough to make sure that we have an even representation of students, because off the top of my head we don't have members currently from Oak Bank or Bowhunt,
Bullmush as well.
or Bullmush or Maiden Early actually. We did have a few.
Maiden Early we do now.
We do actually from Maiden Early, but they're like quite new.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just Bullmush, Oak Bank and Bowhunt are the schools that we don't have.
Okay, that's interesting because Bullmush is in my ward, so maybe I could see if I can get a foot in the door for you. But that would be great, because I think it's really, really important that young people are taught just how politics works and how even local government like this, how it affects them. Because I speak to a lot of adults who really haven't got much of an idea. So if it's kind of taught in schools and the youth council can get the message out there, bring it on, I say.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah, were you going to add something?
Okay, I think we're probably coming. Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, just from my perspective, kind of like recruiting to the youth council is a very kind of varied response. And I understand that a lot of the time schools are quite busy. And so to ask them to kind of hold elections is quite tricky. But I also think there is some work for us to do, just kind of get the message out, like what we're doing, just to try and build up kind of our rapport and just kind of, I don't know, it's seen as a fun and actually an engaging kind of group to join.
Yeah, because I think in other local authorities, I was talking to some other youth MPs actually, and they were saying that youth council elections where they live are actually like a really big thing, and they have loads of demand and loads of young people are really putting themselves out there. So I think here it's about really cultivating that interest and maybe giving the youth council a bit more hype in Wokingham.
Excellent. Okay. I was really interested to hear you say, Holly, that you're keen to participating at the consultations that the council runs. I'm just wondering how the Youth Council is alerted to consultations that they may wish to, to contribute to. Either Sarah or Holly?
Yeah, so I've attended multiple kind of like internal staff meetings just to kind of advertise what the youth council is and what it's kind of there for, and then people then just kind of, I guess, they come to me kind of with opportunities of engagement that they would like, and then they get invited along to a meeting, and then they kind of have maybe a little segment on it, and then the questions are asked there. But again, I think more work could be done to kind of spread the word about that further.
Okay. Sorry, really pleased also to hear throughout the discussion, the desire, to really engage, with the council and council laws. And I don't know if you have any thoughts, about how we could perhaps bring that up, to the next level, as it were.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, so with the panel discussion we're having on Thursday, the 23rd, with local councillors, I actually got that idea from a similar thing that was run in West Berkshire. So at a local secondary school, they, like A-level politics students, held a hustings debate with local councillors just for like an hour or so during school time, and that is something that I'd love to see actually, either if that's facilitated by the borough council, to give students that aren't necessarily wouldn't choose to do that, but then they can actually like get a feel for, oh, okay, that's actually what like the parties stand for, and getting an understanding of local government. So yeah, maybe like hustings debates involving local councillors, events like that.
And really important, but a slightly different sort of matter. I think it's really important that that all of the councillors hear from the Youth Council on a regular basis. And I'm just wondering whether there might be, any ways that you could suggest, that could be facilitated.
Yes, well, I think we were discussing earlier actually about potentially the Youth Council delivering an annual report on like the work that we've been doing to the whole council, because I mean it would be great to like kind of show off a little bit about what we've been doing in meetings, giving members a chance to like develop their public speaking and leadership skills, and also to take suggestions from the borough council, because I think it's really important that like we really work together, and not only are we kind of advising you guys, but you're advising us, and that we can learn from you. And I'd be really keen to model the youth council more of how the borough council works, to give it like kind of sorry. Well, yeah. Yeah, the good bits of the borough council.
Right. Prue?
Sorry, Beth.
Beth, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. It was good to hear that, and I think we could probably make some arrangements through the Mayor's office for you to come and speak to the council at a full council meeting one evening. If you let me have your contact details, and if you see Lucy-Anne, the clerk, afterwards, she'll give them to you. I'll see if I can arrange that for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. And actually, when would be a good time for me to give my contact details, just like for the meeting, for like connections afterwards?
If you could leave them with Sarah, we'll get them from Sarah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to take this issue, if I may, just one step further. I think that we do have a precedent, where every year we have an annual report from one of the organisations that operates within our borough, the Tenants Association. And I think all of the councillors appreciate how informative that evening is, and the really two-way dialogue that takes place each year, with our Tenants Association. So I think there is a precedent there, and I would like, assuming that you're happy with this, Holly, to make a recommendation from this committee that the executive committee considers inviting the youth council. It's not committing the youth council at this stage, but inviting the youth council, to an annual presentation event in front of the whole council.
Yeah, I'm very much in support of that. That would be brilliant. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any comments at all about that? Yeah, Prue.
I do. I'm sure the executive would support that. I think Beth made the point. Beth is, by the way, the deputy mayor, in case you didn't know that, which is why she's talking about that the mayor can invite them anyway, even if the executive didn't like it. But I'm sure we would. I think it's important that we hear from you. So I would really support that idea, and I like the idea. If you could accompany it with the written annual report, that would be better.
Can I just pop in and say, if you leave that with me, we'll sort it out through the Mayor's office and try and get it into a regular calendar so that there is an annual set time, as we do with other people.
Good. Well, let's deal with it in that manner. Okay, thank you very much for your help on that, Beth. Is there anybody who's not spoken tonight first who would like to make any comments or ask any questions? You've spoken, Graham. Anybody else? Okay, Morag.
Just a quickie to say that this sounds really encouraging. I know quite a few of us have had conversations over the months about how to get people interested in local government. And I think we've had a perfect example tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Morag. Graham.
I really just wanted to support the proposal. And it's something that Helen and I had talked about some 12, 15 months ago. And so I am absolutely delighted to see it crystallise.
Thank you for that support, Graham. Well, if there are no... Sorry, Shirley, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, just following on from something that you said, actually, Andrew, was about the tenants coming in. And the tenants come into council and they present their tenants charter each year, and any updates. And I just, that made me wonder whether the youth parliament has a charter and whether it's kept up, a sort of charter for youth in the borough, if you will. And if you don't, are you considering perhaps drawing one up?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So Youth Parliament, we have our manifesto, but that's more national. And I would actually really love to see kind of us take that down to a local level, and maybe have an event, or like over a longer period of time, where young people can vote and submit on policy motions that they would like to see, as kind of like a wish list for the borough for young people. But yeah, I think that's a brilliant suggestion.
Yeah, I think the concept of a youth charter is really, really interesting, and we'll be looking with interest, at how you develop that. Yeah. Well, if there are no more questions or comments, sorry, Richard.
Can I just ask one slightly iffy question? As well as consulting the things you're asked to consult on, does the Youth Council also put things on the agenda that the local authority isn't aware of and isn't paying enough attention to? And what would that look like, I guess, is the question.
So do you mean like kind of suggestions to the youth, to like the borough council that maybe they haven't brought up? We haven't actually done that much of that so far, but I think that would be something that like we could definitely do. And I think what we do quite a lot of is we might be working off a consultation that the borough council have like brought forward, but then it might actually lead down the discussion of like a separate issue. And then we'll like end up sending that back to the borough council like as part of the consultation that we started doing. But I think kind of creating our own like ideas to send off to the borough council is something we can do more of.
Finally, I'm going to stick my neck out. I hope this doesn't cause any problems, but you'll remember at the beginning of the of this meeting, I asked whether there were any questions from members of the public. That could also be an opportunity, for the Youth Council to raise questions, to seek information, to share ideas and so forth with this committee. So I'll just plant that idea as well. So, but I think on behalf of everyone, here tonight, thank you so much, not only for your participation this evening, but for everything that you and your colleagues are doing on the Youth Council. I'd also like to extend those thanks to Sarah, for your role in this process as well. So thank you very much. You are now free to go. Or to stay.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. This has been great. I hope you enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much, Holly and Sarah. Okay, so agenda item 48 is Berkshire West Safeguarding Children's Partnership, the annual report for 2021 to 2022, and that's David Bussi presenting. Could you, I'm sure you're likely to do this, but could you please explain exactly what your role is within the organisation as well?
Do my best. Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I might start on a personal note. It's a shame that Holly's actually gone, but 40 years ago, I was the chair of the Youth Council in a small East Midlands town called Wellingborough. And it was a time when there was no institutional support for such a youth council. And so we were up against it, as it were. And I just might be useful to relate to two very small stories about that. We raised some money for a counselling service because there was none for young people. And I have a photograph of me handing over a cheque for £3,000, which in 1979 was quite a lot of money. And we set up a counselling service called Service 6, and it is still going 40 years later in 3 counties in the East Midlands. And so one hell of an achievement from a little youth council. The more funny story is that we put on a pop concert one year because there was, again, not a great deal being put on for young people in that particular town. And it didn't go down well with the local councillors. And the front page of the local newspaper one afternoon was "Pop Scum Comes to Town." And I was being quoted on the front page of the newspaper. And when my father came home from work, I was only about 19, I think. I didn't half get it in the neck. So from small acorns, Youth Council, great idea. And sitting, listening to that story, I've got a number of ideas which I'd like to come back to, if that's okay. So I was appointed to chair the Berkshire West Safeguarding Children Partnership in July of last year. So this is after this report date. So I can't own this report, sadly, in a personal context. But I'll try to represent it as much as I can. The Berkshire West Safeguarding Children Partnership is set up under the Children and Social Work Act of 2017. and it requires the local authority to collaborate with its local police force and its what was then the clinical commissioning group and is now the integrated care board for Bob. And each of those three partners is equally accountable and responsible for the safeguarding of children in its area. And they need to come together in an executive group to discharge those responsibilities. And we are required once a year to publish a report about the activities of that partnership. And it's a very important way, I think, of holding to account the activities that come under that heading of safeguarding. And one of the things that struck me as Holly was talking is that we really ought to bring that report, this report that you're looking at this evening, to the Youth Council for its scrutiny of that report. Because in a sense, it's the young people of the three local authorities that are in Berkshire West who we are ultimately accountable to. Now, of course, in law, we're accountable to you as the council in Wokingham, in Reading and in West Berkshire, to the Thames Valley Police Chief Constable, and to the Chief Executive of the Bob ICB. But it does strike me that we really ought to be accountable to the young people themselves. So if it's a suggestion that we might add to your list from earlier, I'd like to take that up. The report sets out, I think, a quite complex set of contexts for safeguarding. And over the last 10 years or so, I think the safeguarding industry, if I can call it that, has expanded its boundaries enormously from what was once the field of child protection, and that is looking to safeguard children from harm at home, now to thinking about the safeguarding of children wherever they might be. And so thinking about what happens to children when they're involved in county lines, in child exploitation, criminal exploitation or sexual exploitation, modern slavery, serious youth violence, as well as all of the stuff that we would have put under the heading of child protection. You can see that the arena is complex. There are a whole host of duties and responsibilities placed on those institutions as well as other ones. If we just think about the new responsibilities about serious youth violence that is placed on the local authority as well as other agencies, but also comes under the remit of the Safeguarding Children Partnership, as well as duties around domestic abuse. You can see the context is complex. We have to work closely with those colleagues working on the Community Safety Partnership agenda, as well as others. Thames Valley Police, of course, is also an authority which stretches 9 local authorities. So it has to service 9 safeguarding children partnerships. Now, we've made it slightly easier for them in as much as we brought 3 of those local authorities together. Similarly for Bob, cuts across the whole swathe of the southeast of England. And so collaborating in the way in which the Safeguarding Children Partnership does with the 3 local authorities, I think is really important, although it's very apt to also say, of course, that the 3 local authorities are very different. So there is some administrative convenience in pulling that work together. And we have to be careful, I think, around subsidiarity and ensuring that where decisions can be made more locally, they should be. So I'm happy to answer questions about the report. I think it is, if I might say so, it's one of the more unusual annual reports that's presented. I'm involved in this kind of activity in Lambeth, Lewisham, Northamptonshire, and Portsmouth, as well as in Berkshire West. And so I can say that in some other places, normally the annual report trumpets achievements, whereas I think this annual report is much more measured and it's much more honest about the intricacies, the difficulties, the challenges that face the 3 local authorities and the police service and the ICB. It's also probably useful to just mention as well, of course, as you already know, the ICB is really only just getting up and running. And for, I think, quite a lot of 21, 22, which this report covers, the health representation was much less than we would have liked it to have been. And not least, of course, we were still recovering from the pandemic. And we certainly weren't in the phase where we are now of living with it. It was a much more tricky set of issues. So I think the report, I hope, stands for itself in terms of its content. I'm happy, as I said, to answer any questions that you might have about it.
Okay, can I take the first 3 or 4 hands? Okay, Anne? Sarah? Okay. Online? Not at the moment. Okay. Right. Just before your first question, Anne, okay, I would like to echo what you were saying, about the tone and the structure of this report. I did find it a very practical report. I like particularly, and each section, the suggested areas for development. So I thought that was really, really helpful. Okay, Anne.
Yes, thank you very much for introducing that. So I think I ought to just start by saying or asking, I don't actually know what BOB is or ICB.
The Integrated Care Board for Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire.
Places CCGs.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. And sorry, what was BOB?
Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire.
Oh, right.
It's just a short way of saying a very long phrase. Forgive me if I'm not accurate about that. I would have to go and check. Right.
Okay, thanks. So on page 22, there's a thing mentioned called the Pan Berkshire Child Exploitation Indicator Tool. Mm-hmm. I just wondered what that is, please.
So far as I know, because I'm not familiar with that kind of detail either.
Oh, right.
It's a tool that would measure indicators of risk to children. Right. So there are a number of them, and this is top of the head stuff here, so I won't be getting this accurate. A number of key issues that we know that affect children in terms of their vulnerabilities to risk outside of the home. Being out of school, for example. Having a neurodevelopmental disorder. Having a parent who might be involved in crime. These are critical indicators.
Yeah.
That when we make use of those indicators, we can begin to predict who are our vulnerable cohorts. It's no good waiting until something's happened. We should be getting in and preventing harm in the first place.
Yeah, I'll come back to you in a moment, Anne. Thank you for that, David. I'm just wondering whether Adam or Helen, if you have anything to elaborate on sort of the use of those such indicators and early intervention.
Oh, sorry.
I think Adam's possibly closer to it if he's there. Adam, sorry to drop you in it.
I think you might be muted, Adam. No. Okay, we can't hear you, so I think you're left off the hook, but we will perhaps continue that discussion at another time.
It's actually just going back to that. I've just wondered what form such a tool might take. Do you think it would be like a checklist or a spreadsheet or points or something? Points based?
Probably both of those.
Right.
I know that we are looking at, with Thames Valley Police, the use of robotics.
Right.
Which sounds like we've got these little creatures wandering around of their own accord in the institutions, but actually it's a computer program that is able to interrogate the data in such a way that it highlights the risks.
Right. I mean, I can see that would be useful.
Yeah, I think that is really interesting, Anne. Sorry for interrupting, but perhaps I think we need to seek that information, outside of that, outside of this meeting. But I agree with you. I think that would be really, really useful for us to have a better understanding of. Yeah. Okay. A different issue.
Yeah. I'm just trying to. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just trying to find my questions. Oh.
Yeah. Rue?
Oh yes.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I think we have in response to some of that, we have a harm outside the home strategy that's in development. And at some point when it's finished, that should be probably shared with the committee. Well, I don't know what Helen thinks.
Thank you, Prue. I'm sure we can share that strategy because we have been developing it. It's been through the Children and Young People's Partnership. So we could definitely bring that to the committee. In terms of your questions, I'm sure we can provide an example of a tool and a written response. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, yes. So another question is on, oh dear, page 24, right at the bottom. I did like the measured nature of the report, I must say. I think that's very good. It sort of seems honest, doesn't it? Oh, so it's the bottom of page 6. Yeah, actually, my question is actually on the bottom of page 6. So there was a review to further support schools, parents and young people. We developed an online safety page. So I don't think whether I can. We recognise that social media has been highlighted as a significant concern. They did a review, but it didn't find that social media was a harmful contributory factor. But nevertheless, they have acted on it. And I just wondered why they didn't find it was a contributory factor to young people's problems.
So although the reviews weren't completed by the end of the year that we're talking about here, there was a review that was undertaken in Reading. It was a thematic review of 13 incidences of serious youth violence. And that was published a few months ago. And it was asked specifically to look into whether the use of social media was an accelerant to those incidents of serious youth violence. You'll know that we've just recently published what is called the Harry Review. So it's outside of this timescale and will be reported on in the next annual report. And again, in that instance, the use of social media was very clearly a key feature of what happened to that young person. But in the Reading thematic review, there was nothing that was shown by the evidence that would say, here is social media that is such an important bit of the things that are not right in that context. But I think you're absolutely right to highlight that social media is a key issue. It just may not have been shown up in those 13 cases. Yes, that's the one that relates to the Harry Review.
Okay, sorry for interrupting. I think that's really interesting, and I think this is something we're going to have to, continue to monitor closely. Beth, you had your hand up a moment ago. Was that on this issue?
Yes, it was. Just a follow-on, Chairman, although I'm afraid I didn't hear the report, although I have read it, because my internet went down and it took me a little while to get back onto the meeting. I heard on the news today that most children, by the time they get to 9, have been viewing pornography online through social media, and there was no suggested action from the news reports about that. But have we found that our children, primary school age children, are able to look at pornography? And if they are, what can we do about it?
I've got no reason to think that the children in Wokingham are any different from the report. that you've read today, although we've not, so far as I know, got any specific statistics to back that up. What we are doing is continuing to provide information on the website for the partnership around the safe use of social media instruments, and to offer advice to parents. I think this is an issue that goes well beyond this partnership. And in fact, as a result of the Harry report, we've made a recommendation through the National Safeguarding Panel that they make representation to the government to do more. I think the recent agreement around the online safety bill will go some way, but I think this is something that we have to continue to monitor, and we'll probably have to continue to do so forever.
Okay, thank you. And we are going to have to move on, okay, to another questioner. Sarah?
Thank you for the report. I particularly like the knowing your children or knowing our children. I found that really useful to have those breakdowns. But we all know that SEND children are particularly vulnerable. And what I didn't sort of read is how do you particularly support them? Are there different approaches, or are there different data around the SEND pupils that we could look at?
It's like the mute button, isn't it? It's a very interesting question, I think, and it cuts into some of the complexities around this area, because of course there is a Wokingham SEND strategy, a Wokingham SEND board, and it is doing the detailed work around some of those issues. What the partnership has to do is hold that activity to account to make sure that it is impactful. But I think you're absolutely right. It is one of the key issues that creates vulnerabilities for children.
Sarah? Terry? Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if I may. You mentioned in the report that the key overarching priorities were reviewed following the onset of COVID. Do you have any thoughts on other events and emerging trends that might impact on priorities going forward, such as increasing poverty, the growing numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and you also mentioned serious youth violence. And the reason for asking this, is that it may, then flag up kinds of issues that we should be exploring as an overview and scrutiny committee.
I think you're right to mention the three that you've just mentioned. Being involved in similar activities in Lewisham and Lambeth, they look very different in those contexts. And so in Wokingham, although they are issues, they're nowhere near as big a set of issues as they are in other places. I think the issue to do with poverty and the cost of living crisis is a key one for us to look at. Because I think sometimes some of the vulnerabilities that we're looking to try to address can be hidden in plain sight. And particularly in contexts like Wokingham, where although there are pockets of poverty, it is not something that affects the borough as a whole in quite the same way as it might in other places. And so I think looking into those contexts and keeping an eye on those things are really, really important.
Are there any others besides the three that I suggested that come to your mind?
I think probably the two that I've mentioned are connected in a sense. It's around mental health. Arising out of the COVID context, I think, is a growing number of young people who are despairing, if I can put it that way. And I think we've also got parents who are also suffering from a range of mental health difficulties, and the impact of that on young people's lives shouldn't be underestimated. It's interesting, I think, that we've got domestic abuse boards because it's really important to address those kinds of things. But in my experience, it's children whose parents have enduring and complex mental health problems often fare much worse. But we don't have the same kinds of strategies around those issues, and I think we probably need to do more around that area.
Thank you so much for that. Shirley?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've read with interest the section in the report about Reading Festival, and I think that was an absolutely great initiative. I just wondered, it said participating schools, which suggests that not all schools participated. And is this something that will be an ongoing thing for the coming year, for example, and trying to get other schools that weren't involved on stream with that? Because I just think it's a really, really good idea. As a parent who's had two children post GCSE go to Reading Festival and the whole angst of that, I think this is a really, really great initiative and possibly should be rolled out to other large events as well that attract children.
Yeah, there is. We have a colleague who works for Berkshire, Royal Berkshire Hospital, who champions that area around the safety of young people at the Reading Festival. And she's a bit like a dog with a bone, actually. So if there are some schools that need to be included, she will be at their heels.
I think it's obviously a really good piece of work. Can you tell me how many schools in Wokingham, would you know off the top of your head how many schools in Wokingham participated?
No.
No, it was something to definitely encourage with our schools. And I think if it's going on again, it's something that we could perhaps commit to promoting as a borough as well.
And perhaps we could use the Youth Council, as a conduit. Yeah.
Indeed.
Excellent suggestions. Okay. I'm aware that there are a number of people who haven't spoken yet. Would anybody who hasn't spoken yet like to ask any questions? Make any comments? No? Oh, sorry, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you, David. That was a really helpful overview. I know we're now looking to develop the next annual report. How do you envisage that it might look different or feel different to this current format of report in your, now you're established in role as the scrutineer? Thank you.
I wouldn't want it to look too different because I actually like the style of this. But I think there are some important considerations that might have an impact on the way in which the annual report is set out. I mentioned accountability earlier. And I think one of the key things for me in my role is to ensure that there is accountability across the 3 statutory agencies and the others that are associated with this business. I'm really pleased to be here presenting the report to you, but it's odd, isn't it, that we're talking about a set of activities that are nearly a year old. And, your ability to influence this agenda, which we're talking about, happened a year ago or more. We need to do something about that. So I think the reports have to come earlier. I would be very, very keen to hear from you what your priorities are. And I know I get that in a sense through Helen and through the Chief Executive. But it's through your democratic accountabilities to your citizens and to the young people who are citizens in Wokingham that we really need to hear some of the issues. And there are, I think, if I can put it this way, there are groups of very vulnerable young people whose voices often don't get heard. They're not in any way, shape or form eloquent, and they're often very silent. And it's those young people and their families that we really need to hear from. And I would urge you to champion them really in a sense and hold us to account.
I'm sure that we all relate particularly to that last concern. I would be very interested in any brief sort of initial thoughts from members of this committee and from officers, as to how we might make further progress, to support those vulnerable young people whose voices are often not being heard. Morag, is it on this issue?
It is, yes.
Thank you.
Just a quick thought, a fairly unformed one. I just wondered whether this is something that could find a regular slot in our forward plan, which would instill some sort of timescale. If we knew we had things to decide and discuss, then that would inform our thinking and perhaps would feed into the accountability, make it two-way perhaps.
I think that's a good suggestion. I'll make a note of that for when we come to discuss the forward plan later this evening. Are there any other members of the committee or officers present who have any initial thoughts on this matter? Okay, Prue?
I think David referred to the fact that the ICB is only really beginning to get established. I'm encouraged by some of the people who've moved in recent months to look after it. I feel like after an initial difficult period, our voice is beginning to be heard a bit better. We are a small local authority, and compared to Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, the 3 Berkshire unitaries are quite small, and we are all different, but we tend to be looked at once sometimes. So I think I would hope that the next report would have more encouraging things on the health side. I feel like the people there are actually cooperating. My fear now is that the police reorganisation is going to have an impact on our ability to do things at a local level, because they will have far bigger policing areas by the sound of it. The area commander will be doing a larger area, and we may not get the participation. We're already struggling with our MASH and getting the police involvement in that, and it's how we manage that third dimension is the concern for me in the coming year. So I suppose, I know Helen goes to the bunch up, I'm sure you're alert to all of that, but I would welcome having more regular updates. I do get an update, I participate, and I know David Motto, but I'm not on the executive, but Helen represents us there. So I know our voice is being heard, but the feedback I think is quite important for people, because in fact I don't think we've ever had the Safeguarding Board report presented to everyone in Scrutiny. I can't remember it ever happening before, and I think it is something that we've been lacking, and it's good to see it here. So this is like a first step, and I'm hoping that everybody will follow it up, because life isn't getting any easier for children, and we need to make sure they are safe, and particularly those ones that are not shouting. It's the quiet ones that you really have to worry about.
Well, thank you for that, Prue. I don't see any other hands up now. Now, I think you know that I'm always very keen, where it's appropriate, for this committee to make recommendations. And I sense that there's the potential here for possibly 3 recommendations. The first one was a recommendation that we request that the Berkshire West Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report is brought for scrutiny by the Youth Council. Okay, is that what we were suggesting? Or if you can suggest some other wording, that would be great.
I think I would like to appear on behalf of the Safeguarding Children Partnership at the Youth Council for them to hold us to account.
Okay. So a recommendation that we invite David to appear at a meeting of the Youth Council, okay, to present the report and to be held to garner youth views. Okay, are we okay on some wording along those lines? Okay. Would anyone like to propose that we make that recommendation? I will, and seconded by Graham. Thank you very much. Now, the second issue that was raised, I think, came out of the discussion about viewing of pornography, and I believe that our council wants to be, where it's appropriate, a lobbying council. Okay, and I would like to propose that we consider recommending to the executive that it considers a way of lobbying in an appropriate manner for support for the online safety bill. Rue, yes?
Bits of it are very good, bits of it are not. So I'm quite happy that the executive would support the bits of it which deal with the bit that we've discussed. There are other parts of it that I don't think we could support, but and I don't know what Graham wants to say about it, but he may share a similar view.
I think Prue's predecessor, I would think that her observations are absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's too broad.
Yeah. Okay. Can I make the suggestion, and this is something which we have done before, that Shirley and myself and Prue come up with an appropriate wording that reflects the views that have been expressed tonight. We will then share that wording with all of the members of the committee, seeking comments and hopefully approval. Would that sound agreeable to everybody? Okay, so I'm going to formally propose, that we do that. Okay, seconder? Do you need a second, Shirley?
Right.
Okay, Graham, thank you very much. And then the third area for recommendation is that we request a mechanism, or we explore a mechanism that will enable more regular updates on the subject matter covered in this safeguarding report. Again, I'd like to propose that we get the exact wording after discussion between myself, Shirley, and probably Helen in this instance. Would that be agreeable to everybody? Good. Are there any other recommendations that anybody would like to see flow from this agenda item? Sarah?
And maybe a little information about what the priorities are moving forward rather than having this historic ones.
Yes. And probably include that in the third recommendation about regular updates to include, information about developing priorities. Yeah, good point, Sarah. Thank you very much. Okay, well, Morag.
This is really just a query, which probably shows my ignorance more than anything else. But I was just wondering how we can keep ourselves up to date with what the police might be thinking along these lines, just to maintain the accountability without adding to the workload.
Prue did raise some discussion.
Yes, we have the Community Safety Partnership, and I think it would be probably appropriate to ask the representatives of the council on that, which includes, I think, the chief executive and an exec member, to raise those issues there for a discussion and a report back. That's probably the way to do it.
So I think that's a really, really good point, Morag, and I'd like to propose that be a fourth recommendation. Again, with your approval, we can work on the wording, and we will circulate the suggested wordings for each of these four recommendations to all members of the committee before they are actioned. Shirley.
Yeah, I could just say we have the Community Safety Partnership comes to community and corporate and does a full kind of overview of what they've been up to. Maybe we should have Community Safety Partnership coming here and doing a much more child and young person focused update, perhaps, to this committee, rather than the broad one that we get at community and corporate.
I can see David nodding. Sounds like a good suggestion. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to close the discussion now on this item, and thank you so much, David, for participating, this evening. It is very, very much appreciated. If you could also pass on this committee's appreciation to the work that all of the members, of that safeguarding team do. That would also be very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So moving on now. Agenda item 49, the annual Wokingham Borough SEND survey. And Terry is going to be presenting and leading the discussion on this item.
We weren't aware that we were discussing this one in a great detail. We thought we'd come here to talk about the transport survey, but we will be happy to answer any questions that you have on it. What I will do to start with is I will just share this, which is just a bit of an overview as to how we collect our information and who we are. I know, but the first page is so. She's on it, Graham. You should know better. So, 10 Voices Wokingham, who are we? We are the Parent Carer Forum for the Borough, and we are an independent group of parents and carers who all have children with SEND. We act as a collective voice to represent those parents and obviously their children. And they can have any special educational need or disability, and they are from age of 0 to 25. So we act very much as a critical friend, and we work with the local authority and education and health, looking at what's going well, what's not going so well. And then part of what we do is obviously do these types of surveys to gather information from families, asking them specific questions, whether it may be on transport, whether it's the SEND survey, which covered everything in SEND, and that's everything in SEND: health, social care, transport, school. What else? Help me, Sarah. What else did we cover?
It's not what we don't do.
How parents were feeling, everything. The annual survey was the first one that we've run because we felt that we've often done little surveys, but it was very important coming out of all the SEND improvement work that we got a whole picture of how things were for families on the ground. What impact was it making, so that we could really understand and then track going forward every year how things are improving. So the annual survey went out in the summer term. It went out far and wide through email, through social media. It went to schools. It went to other voluntary groups that support SEND families. We were really pleased that we got 440 responses, which might not sound huge in the grand scheme of things, but actually in terms of families with SEND in the borough, that was a really good response rate. And we had good representation across all disabilities and across all age groups as well. So we were really pleased with that. And then that formed our SEND survey, which I believe you've all had circulated to you. The key findings from that one were certain number of services in the borough: SENDIAS and Assist. SENDIAS is the SEND Independent Advice and Support Service. So they support very much families in the borough in terms of SEND support, in terms of the EHCP process, in terms of annual review process, tribunals, exclusions, that type of thing. They're a Wokingham Borough service, but they work very much at arm's length from services such as children's services. They sit outside of that. So they support families. Assist, who are another Wokingham Borough service, who support families with autism or children with autism, both pre and post diagnosis. The short breaks team, certain short breaks team members were recommended, as doing a very good job, but although one of the negatives was that the short break service as a whole really wasn't very good, and there are lots of gaps in the service. Parents noted that the interim staff, some of who have been brought on board recently, have made a real positive impact. Some of the SENDIAS training courses that we're hosting for families have made a real difference and given them some of the information they needed.
Things like the Preparing for Adulthood booklet were very well received, and also helping with some information. And some of the SEND team improvements were starting to be seen by the families. There were a whole list of things where they felt that there still can be improvements made, and I won't go through those because those are all in your pack. But I wondered if there are anything you want to add in terms of the SEND survey, or if anybody's got any particular questions around the SEND survey.
Okay, questions on the SEND survey first. Okay, let first three of my hands, so Pauline, and who else? Anne, okay, and Shirley, okay. Just before we take your questions and observations, Pauline. Sorry. Just before we take your questions and observations, Pauline, I would like to thank Terry for including in her introduction, okay, answers to some of the questions that I know some members submitted earlier, okay. For example, about SENDIAS and assist. And I mention this because it shows the value, you know, of if you're able to, you know, submitting questions prior to the meeting so that, you know, we can, you know, get answers to them in a very timely, sort of appropriate manner. So thank you for those who submitted those questions, and thank you for Terry for including them in your introduction. Okay, Pauline.
Thank you. I was very concerned when I read this report, mainly because I've had people in my own ward very, very angry and complaining about the service that they've received for their youngsters. And I had understood that a couple of years ago, the department was trying to improve things, but it doesn't seem to me as if much has improved at all. There are two issues particularly that I've got concerns about. One is the lack of training and preparation that some of the drivers and escorts have to deal with these children. I mean, they do have special needs. And no, please, can I finish? Because I'm really...
That's actually the next agenda item on the transport survey.
No, it's not, not on the survey. It's about how the special needs children are being dealt with. And now you've put me off my stride now, Chairman. But they really do need to be trained as to how to deal with every one of these individuals' needs. And I just want to do a few quotes from page 57. They're all friendly, but they do not understand his mental health or behaviours. This means they can't support him in the taxi travel for 45 minutes each way. The language barrier is the biggest issue, including the inability to communicate with me about his behaviours. Immediately I started to tell them about his needs. They speak a different language and drove off. The driver and escort were both unprofessional and very rude. This is page 58. My son is non-verbal, and the way they treated me is so unfair.
Okay, Pauline, I think we get...
Now, please let me finish, because I'm really very, very concerned about this. Page 60.
I'm quite happy, you know, to ask for a response, both from the perspective of SEND Voices.
Talking about the survey.
Yeah, but this is the next agenda item. There's actually
right. Well, I can say it again then when we come to the next agenda item.
Yeah, Pauline, you've raised a really important point. Okay,
the survey,
and I think it'd be really good, you know, to hear a response from SEND Voices and a response from any officers who would like to comment.
So just to be clear, that there are two surveys. There's the one that we did in the summer of 22, which I agree the transport information is quite upsetting. And we have had some awful stories around transport. We then ran another one at the end of autumn term. So it was for the cohort starting in September, and we saw a significant improvement. So although there are still stories around training, you are correct, training is still one of the recommendations that we would probably put forward around what needs to be move things forward. But to be really clear that there is a new transport panel that's in place. There is much better joint working. We've seen much better communication between the transport team and the SEND team around children's needs. So there's been less complaints, for example, around those that are travelling with other children and that sort of thing. I'm not saying it's fixed, because there is still work to be done, but overall there is a significant improvement from the July survey through to the autumn one around it. So I think we do have to give credit to some of the improvements that have been made, but you are right, there is still issues around training that need to be addressed, and it is something that is I think it's part of the programme to look at and review on how we can achieve some of those goals.
And if I could add, I'm sure that this is an area that is going to require ongoing attention. I don't know if there are any officers who wish to add anything further to that issue, the specific issue of transport. Yes,
I'm more
Sal,
than happy to provide some feedback, and thank you very much for that Sarah. I think we would also agree that whilst things have improved from the early transport survey, clearly there is still work to do. We don't get it right every single time. We do transport lots of children across and throughout the borough and beyond, but unfortunately the experience for some of those children is not what we would expect or desire for them. As Sarah has mentioned, our SEND team and our corporate transport unit working much more closely. We have the transport panel that meets and has broader engagement and involvement around understanding and supporting the travel needs for children. We know that our corporate transport unit works really hard to get the right messages to our transport providers in terms of the type of provision that we expect them to deliver on our commissions. Of course, it's never good when we hear and see that our children and young people are still not receiving the level of service that we would like. And this is an issue that I will take back and raise again with our corporate transport unit colleagues. We've got the head of SEND here, so from a SEND team perspective, they've heard it loud and clear. But again, I think I would reiterate that whilst the tone may not have come across, it is an improving picture for children within the borough and their transport.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Sal. I don't see any other hands up at the online at the moment. I would also add that there will be an opportunity to revisit some of those issues in agenda item 53 when we talk about the travel assistance policy implementation. So there'll be another opportunity there. Pauline, do you have any other questions on completely different
50 now, because I saw 49
no,
50 as the same.
No, we're still on item number 49, the SEND survey. No, thank you. Okay, Anne.
Okay, thanks. I submitted quite a few questions earlier. I'm not sure, better not go through all of them, I think. But anyway, on page 7, educational setting, 58% rated services and professionals as working together either not very well or poorly. Do we know what aspects they were not working together about? Is there any information on that?
So I think that the main things to remember, this is around the Ofsted inspection. So this is a local area SEND survey. So we're looking at all communication across education and health and the local authority. So it's really important. So what families are asked is, do all your professionals that are looking after your child talk to each other and communicate well? So, for example, it might be a social worker talking to the school. It might be the school talking to the SEND team. It's those sorts of things. And how many times does a family have to tell their story? And that's really what that question is about. So that feedback is predominantly that really families are finding that they have to retell their story to lots of different professionals, and that there isn't always a lot of joint working, getting all the right people around the table. But to be clear, this isn't any one particular aspect. This is a broad, do you find that professionals work together well? So you couldn't say it's against social worker, and you couldn't say it's necessarily against health. There is further details around that in some of the health sections and across the three that are broken down over social care and education as well. So you can cross-reference those if that does that help.
Yes, it does.
And Terry has also gone through all of your questions, which we will email out and given answers to all of your questions. So none of those will get lost. We'll email those out after the meeting.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah, and just for clarity then, the issue that's just been discussed, arises out of the challenges, as I understand it, arises out of the challenges of multi-agency work, which, I'm sure will continue to be one of the foci of this committee. And it's very generous of Sarah and Terry to have offered to email out the responses to each of the questions that Anne and others submitted. Are you happy with that, Anne?
Yes, I am. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Any other completely different matters, Anne?
Well, yeah, I was thinking there were one or two. Sorry, I think there were one or two which sort of. Oh, here we are. I thought this was rather a concern. Where the respondents experiencing considerable delays in obtaining reports from people like the EdPsych and SALT, and presumably it's the occupational therapist, when these reports are required to produce an EHCP, is that what's causing delays with EHCPs, or were there other problems? And who coordinates the provision of the EHCPs?
Okay, Terry?
It's mainly a lack of staff, so it's lack of educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, OTs, and that's nationally across the country. And then because obviously there's not many of them, it takes them, with the numbers that are coming in, they just don't have the capacity to turn the reports around in time, and therefore it has a knock-on effect to the EHCP process.
Right, because I read that they're supposed to get these things done within 20 weeks or something.
Yeah.
So presumably a lot of them must miss that then, do they?
Yeah.
And that data is monitored through the Send IIP board. So there are dashboards where that's monitored, and reasoning behind the sliding timescales. They did improve under the written statement of action, but then with the COVID response, it has started to decrease again as we're finding the numbers go up and we don't have the stuff.
Literally my side at the moment.
Sorry.
And again, and I think that's an example of the types of question that you will receive, and we'll all receive a written response to, which may well generate, further questions in subsequent meetings. So if everybody's happy, I'd like to perhaps move on from those questions.
Actually, just one summary thing is, I think there was a bit of a theme of being difficult for parents to find information, and I think several of my questions are on that theme actually. So I'll finish with that then.
Yeah. So the local offer is supposed to be a website where families can go and access information, and every local authority has to have one. Notoriously, local offers vary in their quality. It's one of the things that we know, and it's part of the Send IOP, hopefully, work stream. But a lot of the work that is planned is dependent on the safety valve, which I think we will talk about later. So it comes down to funds and money and capacity. So the safety valve programme, I believe it's integral to that, hopefully. But we will talk about that if she can.
Okay, thanks very much.
Just give a small thing about that, because one of the things that's happening in the local authority is the complete replacement of the website next summer, because the supplier that we've got is not going to be able to do it anymore, and we're moving to a new supplier. And as part of that, you won't see updates and things on the current website unless they're absolutely essential. But in the new website, they are very conscious, so we need to provide the information in a much better way than it currently is. At the moment, there's a button marked something like local offer for Send Children or something on the front. Unless you've already encountered what that is, you would not have a clue what the local offer is. So we need to change the way it's presented. And that really brings me into what I wanted to say about this thing. What this survey says to me is that our communication with the parents is done in a way that doesn't communicate very well. And I think there's a mismatch between what the professionals think they're communicating, because they're communicating it in a professional way, and what the parents receive. And there are other difficulties, because there's, I think you've referred to, haven't you, the staff shortages, the number of specialists that miss. It's a national problem, the shortage of money in the system. If you're a parent, you fight for your child, and those two things can sometimes butt up against each other, because parents get desperate for what they need, which cannot always be provided. Sometimes it can't be provided anyway, even if we had all the money. You know, children who need very specialist places, when there just aren't any, and we would pay for them if there was a place, but there just isn't something that can cater for that child near enough for it to be acceptable to the parent, for example. And we have to go a long way away. And obviously, as a parent, you don't want that to happen. So that we need to explain better as a local authority why things happen. And I do think we need to build up those communication channels. I'm hoping we're starting to do that. The other thing that we need to do is that word co-production. So we need to work with Send Voices and with the parents to produce all the things we do, including things like the letters we send to parents. Because if we can do that, we can actually hopefully get over one of the problems that we've got. And we have got a Send improvement programme, and I will talk about it a bit more in my update, but not at huge length. But the only other thing I wanted to say was the thing that Terry and Sarah told me as they came into the room, which I think needs more publicity, which is that they have now got their charity status as a charity, which is excellent news, and well done for that.
Thank you. One of the reasons about the charity is that as part of our DFE remit, it is participation. So it's looking at what goes on for families and feeding that back into the services that are given to those families. Becoming a charity will allow us to apply for other funds, because we'd actually like to move into offering families more support, because one of the things that's come out really clearly is they don't know how to navigate the system, and they are lacking a lot of support. And some of that is around mental health, and actually literally some hand holding and just listening to families so that they've got somewhere to turn. So that's what we're hoping to be able to do moving forward, but it's a big undertaking.
Rue mentioned the potential for co-production, you know, to help to improve communications. Can I ask Sarah and Terry to what extent you feel there have been opportunities, you know, to really engage in co-production, and how you might see this develop in future?
We have been extremely involved in all aspects of the written statement of action and now the Send IIP board. So we sit on all the working groups. We do our surveys, we feed that back in. I think what parents would like going forward is we're very much the parents are telling us this, what we need to go back to them is the you said we did. So we need to go back to them with the we did. And I think that's the bit that's missing at the moment, which we'd like to make sure is co-produced in language that parents will understand, but so that they know what's happening going forward.
I think we'd be very much interested in that as a committee as well, wouldn't we? Yeah. Thank you for that. Morag.
Just so that I've understood this, am I right in thinking that the feeling is that communications generally with parents leaves a little bit to be desired? And is it perhaps also a feeling that the timescales involved can sometimes be a bit lengthy? And if that is the case, are we able to look ahead and see whether this might be improved, sort of, dare I say, speedily? Thank you.
I think, to be fair, we do try. There are some letters and things that we'd really like to get our hands on. There are some letters around the educational plan process, for example, that are a legal requirement. So that they are legal text, which is quite confusing for families that you have to include in a letter, for example. But yes, there are letters that we would really like to get our hands on and have a rewording of. Some of that can be down to accessing the right officers, and some of that can be accessing Capital One, for example. It's not so easy to change all of the letters on the system. But we do have a co-production group under the Send IIP where we do try and work across all work streams and look at where we can co-produce things and we can get involved as much as we can. We try hard.
Thank you for that. And it's really good to hear that there is a co-production group, within the Send IIP. Yeah, thank you for that. I would like to ask one, possibly two questions, if I may. We mentioned a moment ago difficulties in accessing particular kinds of resources, particularly those around very high needs, children, young people with very high needs. And we've heard a lot, over time about the increasing complexity, of needs. And I'd just be really interested in anybody's thoughts, okay, on if and how this might sort of feed into our scrutiny, overview and scrutiny agenda going forward, because there doesn't seem to be any dispute. There doesn't seem to be any dispute, that there is this increasing complexity, and we're going to have to address it. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts about what sort of things, new priorities, challenges, and so forth, this might raise, that we should be factoring into our forward programme.
I would say a lot of if you look at a school like Addington, families, we never get complaints about Addington. It's a specialist school. It looks after its pupils and its families extremely well. I would say it's mainly around an inclusion agenda in our mainstream. That's where we're breaking at the seams. It's where the forgotten pupils, those that don't, they have additional needs, but they don't have an educational healthcare plan. Even those with educational plans, they struggle with careers advice, next steps, preparing for adulthood. And the whole inclusion agenda, I think that SEND support within the mainstream system is going to be the big cost saving actually for the borough, in the sense if we have those pupils included, they're not going to need the specialist placements further down the line.
It's something called the ordinarily available as well, which is really important, that all schools are really on board with the ordinarily available and are offering it. And that again is not just a school education thing, that's the ordinarily across health, social care and education. So making sure those mainstream schools really are inclusive, because that's the one thing we hear from parents again and again and again is schools don't make reasonable adjustments or schools aren't inclusive.
Before I come to Shirley on this issue, yeah, could I ask if any officers have any thoughts on this specific issue? Sal?
Yeah, I think has already been outlined, that the complexity as well as the increase in volume or numbers of children either needing to be supported with SEN or supported with an EHCP is a real challenge, not just for Wokingham but for a number of local authorities. We're putting in place both through the Send IIB and through our other work. You'll have heard mention of Safety Valve that we are currently in negotiation on, a range of work streams that will look at both provision, making sure we've got the right types of schools and settings and arrangements within the borough, looking at how we can enhance the provision within our mainstream, so working exactly on the point that Sarah and Terry were talking about in terms of broader inclusivity within our mainstream schooling, as well as how do we support schools. So as well as supporting children and families, it's how do we support schools to support children? How do we put the right SEN support arrangements in place? How do we make sure we've got the right workforce development in place? All of those other aspects that means that we're looking at this systemically. I think one of the things that it is worth recognising about the Wokingham system, though, is that proportionally, vis-a-vis national statistical information tells us, is that actually we do have many more children with SEN, with EHCPs accessing mainstream provision than many other areas. The challenge for us is about making sure that that is delivering for all children with SEND and EHCPs that attend those provision in a way that, again, for some, it does not currently. And we've got to make sure we've got the system, and we're developing work streams that address that in terms of how do we support schools and settings, as well as how do we get the right level of provision in place across the borough. And again, our Send Voices Wokingham, our health colleagues are all part of that partnership to deliver that. Terry was talking about ordinarily available, which is a key part of this framework. What should be there, what skill set, what support should be there before the need for additional support, i.e. EHCPs, and making sure that those provisions are available to children and young people early in order to support meeting their needs effectively. So there's a whole raft of work. Chair, one of the questions that you asked is how can Children's Overview and Scrutiny continue to be engaged in this agenda. I think it is an agenda that will continue to go on for quite some time, and I'm sure that colleagues in Children's Services will be more than happy to provide regular update reports on how we're progressing along that journey.
Thanks, Sal. Do you have any things you'd like to sort of come back on in what Sal has said, or any additional comments you'd like to make on what he said?
We would completely agree that supporting parents and schools with the inclusion is really, really important. I guess my question would be around the number of plans within mainstream school. Is that higher in Wokingham because that provision actually isn't being addressed across the mainstream setting? So therefore, families are seeking plans in order to be able to access mainstream education. And it would be interesting to look at that data a little bit closer.
Okay, if that could be minuted and followed up, amongst the officers, that would be wonderful. Shirley?
Thank you. Yeah, I often, when I want to kind of find an answer to a question, I look to see what other local authorities do. And I wonder if you do the same, and you look to see whether there are examples of best practice elsewhere that we could learn from, whether there are any other equivalent groups like yourselves in other areas that perhaps you meet at conferences where, and are you able to feed in information like that to the whole mix?
So parent carer forums, there are 152. Every local authority in England has a parent carer forum, and we feed into the region, which is SE19 in the southeast. And I actually represent the SE19 on the regional and national network as well. And then that feeds up into the national network, where we sit and talk to ministers. We spoke to the new families minister. I believe she's even coming to our conference at the end of the month. So we feed into the social care review, the green paper. I'm working on a SEND quality improvement framework with the NHS at the moment. So there's lots of things that it gets fed and funneled all the way through. Did that answer all of your questions? And yes, we do work with West Berkshire and Reading on our JIG imprint, particularly around health. We also work with our counterparts in Buckinghamshire and Oxford, and we all meet every 6 weeks as forums across the region, and we discuss the issues and things that are going on and best practice. That's also fed in through the SE19 work. So there is a SEND forum, which is joint working, which meets every other month, which Wokingham is part of. Elaine Munro sits on the strategic group with me. There's an operational group as well. So there's lots of work that goes on within the region where all the best practices is shared. And in fact, we did a co-production one a little while ago, and we did our local offer, and we've also looked at Wokingham's charter as pieces of good practice, which was nice to do. So it was quite interesting, the local offer live one, which is an event we usually run end of September, October time, where officers come along and we look at all the resources available within Wokingham, which was extremely well attended by families. We sold out in minutes. Not that we sell the tickets, we issue them for health and safety reasons, because we have to restrict the numbers. But yes, and it was interesting for us because we've been running that 12 years, maybe longer. Because for us, that's just bread and butter. But for other local areas, it was something new. So it was quite intriguing for us, but nice that Wokingham does do that really well.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So, and obviously, if you did pick up things from other areas that are sort of groundbreaking, you would be feeding them in here with alacrity, I hope.
It's always better not to be reinventing the wheel, isn't it? Yeah. I'm just wondering.
We never reinvent wheels.
I'm just wondering whether Richard or Graham might have any observations or questions on this agenda item.
Well, not really, because I'm very cognizant of what they've been doing. I was very involved, well, kicked off over 2 years ago, even with Helen's predecessor, and Sarah gave me a damn good smacking for not getting them involved. And, you know, here again we are. And so I'm delighted to see things crystallise.
Thank you. Yeah. And Richard?
I think, and I suppose the thing I'm thinking is, as a parent with a son within the HCP, just how exhausting it is to be in this process year after year, and anything the local authority can do to take some of that pressure off would be great. But we've been doing it for years, and we still miss a deadline to reply to the HCP. I just missed that detail in the letter, and it wasn't a bad letter. It's just impossible to stay on top of everything when life's so busy. So anything we can do to make it easier, then let's do that.
And I think some of those strategies and tactics are in the SEND IIP, aren't they? And there's, yeah.
Chair, I'm just wondering, you said we did. I think that would be a tremendous thing for us to take forward. So would entirely support that.
Really, that parents would really welcome that.
And it's something we've been discussing with Jamie as well, who was quite keen. Yeah. And just to let you know, we brought some samples of our leaflets as well, because in case you're interested or would like to take any for your constituents, including the booklet that we did on the local offer when we couldn't run it during COVID, which has gone down really well with parents. They've really appreciated that. It's not an extensive list, but it's a good starting point.
That's really good. I think we're just about to draw this item to a close. When we do, I would like, because I think this you said we did, or we said you did, is such an important thing. I'd like us to actually adopt that as a recommendation so that it doesn't get lost, you know, in the minutes. Yeah. But before we close this agenda item, I do have, if I may, one further question, and it's on an issue that doesn't seem to have been included in the survey, and it's the matter of standing down of children and young adults who might have received support but who may no longer require this. And I'm just wondering, you know, whether you recognise this, you know, as a matter, yeah, and if you do, you know, how well you feel or not, that it might be working.
I think that's varied on case by case. I think it's something we're still working on within the SEND IOP work around the criteria around that and how that's going to be done. It's different for different people, of course, depending on their needs. But there is, I would have said, an argument around mainstream placements, particularly moving forward if we do get a very good SEND support and inclusion policy going with our mainstreams, whether some of those, my children included, because I've got 2 children with plans who are both autistic, potentially they could, if they had better inclusion at school, have their plans stepped down. But I'd probably fight you on it, to be honest, because I'd need proof.
I think that's where a lot of families would be at the moment. They would feel quite nervous because historically they haven't seen that the things are in place. I think it would be about building confidence and making sure that they knew that things would be in place for their children and the schools are inclusive and the ordinarily availables and all those sorts of bits and pieces and those building blocks there to sort of foundation it.
But plans come to an end naturally at the age of 25,
Yeah.
or if you go off to university, for example. So there is a natural standing down process that does occur then.
Prue.
Say something about this because I think I suppose how am I going to look at this? EHCPs are specific in some ways and very general in others. So they will name a setting quite often, or a type of setting, or something like that. That's somewhere where you're expected to go to school. But the general outline of the EHCP is much more sort of, this is the kind of direction we want this child to go. I worry about it sometimes. I'm not an expert, but I think that if an EHCP never changes, it is probably an indication that you're not meeting that child's needs because you haven't done anything that alters any of that stuff. And there is a general tendency for them not to change at all. Now, it might be several years before something changes, but there are certain points, and I think the law enforces you to look particularly, for example, when you hit year 9, your annual review, you have to consider the future of the child particularly, and that happens at various other transition points as well. And if it doesn't, you have a bit that sticks on the front, as far as I remember, which is sort of, this is the child's voice about what they'd like to do when they grow up or whatever. But if nothing in the plan ever changes and it remains the same as it was when they were in primary school, what have you actually achieved with that plan? I just feel that there are certain points where a better revision, it could be a stepping up or a stepping down, and it just doesn't happen in a comprehensive enough way. And I understand sometimes why it doesn't, because we don't have enough ed psychs and we don't have, and schools are not necessarily trained to, because they do the interview and to get the voice and things. We can do that better. And I think that we need to give parents that confidence. I don't know what you guys think.
And you specifically said stepping up as well as stepping down.
So there's several parts to that. You do have an annual review every year. You're right, at key transition points, they do need to do an in-depth review. But legally, you're not required. And the DEFE guidance at the moment is that you shouldn't have to update the whole plan every year because it's too much work on the local authority. However, there is a lot of pushback from families because unless it's in the plan, they have nothing to hold the school to account. And it's quite hard. It can be particularly in mainstream settings. And there is a real difference between those specialist provisions that do plans every day, like Paddington, that are really, really well versed in it compared to those in mainstream schools. So there is a lot of disparity. Jenny did a brilliant piece of work around annual reviews and went into all of the year 9 annual reviews, and hopefully we'll be able to build on some of the work that she brought forward. But it is a sticking point because families do want annual reviews updated annually. And often they will be milestones. So, for example, I'm going to use a personal one because I don't want anyone else to be identified. With my daughters, the EP said to me, she's unlikely to ever achieve this, but it should go into the plan. So, okay, she might not achieve that social aspect, but could it not have been broken down into smaller steps that maybe she could have achieved 3/4 of it or something? And it's those things. So it's also about looking around the quality and the smart outcomes. But I have to say, overall, I would say, Terry, in the last 3 years, the timeliness has generally improved, other than the lack of staff, as has some of the quality.
And just for clarity, you're saying that there is a work group one of the working groups looking at these issues at the moment. Is that right? No.
Sorry, the annual reviews does need to be incorporated into one of the work streams.
Yeah, I think it is sort of, isn't it? Because we are looking, I mean, stepping people down is one of the work streams.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I used the wrong term, work group, rather than work streams. So yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's agenda item 49. Item 50 is the related school transport survey. Okay, the SEND school transport survey, which we've already touched upon. Thank you, Pauline. Are there any, would you like to introduce that or say any more about that survey? Otherwise, we can go straight to questions and comments.
all I would say is just a bit of background on this. For a number of years, transport has been probably one of that and CAMS are the two key topics that come up whenever you talk to parents. September 2021 was particularly bad. The homeschool transport service was completely recommissioned, and we were inundated with parents' concerns over lots and lots of different things. And then following that, as Sarah mentioned earlier, there was the introduction of a new SEND transport process and also the SEND transport panel. And we were asked to complete this survey to ask parents, had it improved? So the survey was sent out to all parents who are in receipt of SEND home to school transport. So that's quite a small group of parents. It's about 400, covers 408 children. And we did that end of November into December so that the back to school in September 2022 had gone through, things had settled down, and then we wanted to ask them, had it improved? And that's the results of the SEND transport, which are in your pack there. So yeah, we had 100 responses, which is about 24% of the cohort, which again is a really good response rate. Yeah, any questions?
So Shirley.
Thank you. Yeah, it sort of follows on from Pauline's points to some extent, but the training for drivers and escorts, and Sal touched on this as well. Is there a problem with turnover of staff? So people get trained and then they leave, and then it goes on. You know, in terms of the companies we use, the taxi companies, the minibus companies, and so on. Is that a part of the problem that they?
To be honest, we're not woking officers, so actually we'd need a woking officer to address that ideally.
In terms of, if I can come in here, in terms of any churn within our providers and taxi drivers and assistants, I'm afraid I will have to take that back to our corporate transport unit and maybe provide a written answer, if that's okay.
Can I suggest that we do have Zoe, online, and item 53, is looking at the travel assistance, the implementation of the new travel assistance policy, where I think it would be legitimate for us to raise some of those very specific questions, operational questions, if that's okay with everybody. Yeah, Pauline?
Thanks. So I had assumed that you would elide them. So because in a sense that there is an awful lot in common. We're seeking parents' reactions, and a lot of these issues do boil down to the same thing. We pay an awful lot for transport, and it's just important that we get it right. And despite the great efforts of Graham and Prue, which I know have been huge, we're still not getting it right. There have been some improvements, I'm glad to say, but to my mind, there are still two really, really big issues. And the second one, which I'll come to later, is something that we've already partly dealt with under the previous agenda item, and that's communicating with parents. I'll come to that a bit later. But the one that concerns me most is about the lack of training and lack of understanding by the drivers. I've already made some quotes, but things like behavioural issues due to special needs which were poorly managed by the escort. The escort is supposed to be there to look after them, not to manage them poorly. I won't go over again the ones that I read earlier, but a lot of these are about well-being and safeguarding, and they are not happening. The well-being is being ignored and the safeguarding is going wrong. Page 66, he drives over the speed limit, runs through red lights in traffic. We caught him doing so, and even a family friend stopped to have a chat with him about driving safely with children on board. He lets young children lean out of the passenger window, drives too fast and barely waits for the escort to close the door.
Okay,
or put
Pauline,
the
I'm sorry for
seatbelt on.
interrupting, okay? But please think that the fact that these comments from respondents, are all there, okay, recorded in the report and recognised by Send Voices and indeed, I'm sure by our
I
officers.
really do think that we need to point out some of these huge comments.
Absolutely.
By the
So what I was
parents.
going to suggest.
I will only give you a couple more then.
If I can interrupt, I'm sorry. Okay, because we have all read these. Now, my suggestion is that under agenda item 53, we actually have Zoe Story online, who will be able to update us, on and give us feedback, on some of these issues. Unless representatives from Send Voices wish to comment further, okay, I think we can kind of take it as read.
Chairman, I'm sorry you're cutting this debate short.
No, it's not, because we will come back to it with the officer in agenda item 53, and I think that's
because this is the agenda item that we're looking at the moment. It's about parental comments on the experience that they're receiving. I won't go on with the quotes, although, as you've said, there are many, many, many bad experiences. But I will mention the second thing that I was going to, and that's the general dissatisfaction with the feedback that they get from the council. Nothing has been done.
Okay, now again,
2 months to address this.
We've all read these comments, and they are really, really
finished, Chairman.
No, I'm going to.
I was going to make a suggestion.
Okay, I'll take a suggestion. Yep.
And I won't go on with the quotes because, as you say, we have all read it. But I was appalled by what I read. You asked what more scrutiny can do to help this. I would like to see a report at the next meeting telling us what has been done about A, training of the escorts and drivers, and B, to improve communication with the parents and explanations as to why, as Prue rightly said, we can't always do what they want. And then I would like us to do an annual survey with the results brought back to us, because I was appalled by this report. I really was terribly upset by it.
Okay.
So I make that as a formal
resolution.
resolution.
Thank you.
I propose that as a formal resolution.
I'd like to suggest that we come back to that in agenda item 53. Okay, but any comments from Send Voices?
To be fair, we are going to run our general whole local area Send survey again this year, and we will run the transport one again. It's an ongoing feedback loop that is part of it. There has been a lot of joint working, and communication has improved, but we do all acknowledge that there is more room for improvement, particularly around so families, for example, might complain to school about a taxi service, but aren't necessarily informing the CTU. And we've recognised that as a loop, which has come out of the survey. Is something that we need to plug as a gap. The training, I think I'll let Zoe update you around the training because that is an ongoing issue that we need to look at and address. But just to be clear, these are surveys that we run independently. So it isn't the Send team or the transport team assessing themselves. This is something we run independently, and we feed into the system for the officers to look at. So we don't have any control over the actions that are taken. We can just make recommendations.
Yeah, and I think, can I just say what our two really strong recommendations will be is a proper feedback mechanism to CTU to inform commissioning going forward. And the other one would be training to include not just safeguarding, but Send for all drivers and escorts.
And maybe a little support with their letters.
Yeah.
Second one?
Maybe some support around some of the letters they send. So, for example, a child may end up with sole transport because they are the only child that is travelling to that particular school, but then another child may join that school, which could then enter into that taxi. And families don't often or might not understand that they're only sole transport because they're the only child there. So it's helping families to understand that potentially another child could be in that taxi with them at a later stage, and the work around that and allowing the family time to prepare the individual.
Okay, could I ask you to help us by trying to develop, not necessarily tonight, but in the short term, sort of a fairly pithy sort of recommendation on that second issue, because it's.
Yeah, so
I haven't been able to summarise it in my own mind.
Feedback mechanism. The second one was Send training for
Extended.
drivers and escorts.
Okay, that's fine.
We did a slide on
that's
our
fine.
recommendations, which we can send in to you.
Okay. I'll come to Helen in just one moment. Okay. Whilst those two recommendations, are fresh in people's minds, are people happy for us to adopt the same process that we'd agreed for earlier recommendations? We will work on wordings. Okay. In this case, with Sarah and Terry and Shirley. Okay, and then circulate the wordings for discussion and approval by all members of the committee. The other thing I'd say before we come to Helen, are we happy with that?
Is there somebody that will second my formal resolution, Chairman? Shall I read it again?
Well, let's deal with this first, but your ones I would like to deal with.
Very specifically
I would like to deal with under agenda item 53. And I think that at least one of your recommendations may have been superseded by the recommendation that Send Voices have just proposed. But we can come back to that in item 53. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, but 53 is also about assisted transport, and it's about includes training of drivers and escorts and so forth. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. So are people happy with us for us to proceed in the manner that I've suggested with that recommendation? Okay, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to acknowledge, it's the nature of a survey like this that we get the most outspoken comments from the minority of those who may be very dissatisfied. So I just want us to hold on to the fact that for a number of parents, they are receiving a good service. We think this survey is extremely valuable. We want it to continue. We want to learn and improve. The corporate transport unit is not here this evening in terms of, unless Rebecca's coming in, Zoe is, but Zoe's Children's Services. We have a split between Children's Services and the corporate transport unit. So we'll be taking recommendations out of this panel to the corporate transport unit. Yeah, so I just want us to be aware of that. It goes beyond Children's Services.
Okay. One thing which I'd like to add just before we probably draw this item to a conclusion, is that one of the outcomes, of these first annual surveys from Send Voices is that they do provide really useful baseline data, which will enable us to track over time any changes, hopefully, continued progress, on these matters. So I think that, they are extremely valuable, documents, and thank you everybody who's been involved, including all the respondents. So, Prue.
Just 2 sentences on that. I think it is much more valuable for Send Voices to do the survey than it would be for the council, because I think people are more inclined to answer if you send it to them. So I'm really grateful that you have done that. And the other thing I think is that things were almost bound to go wrong in 2021 because they changed the whole commissioning model. So it was definitely going to be a bad year. But part of the problem was not the professionalism of the staff or anything like that, but the fact that there was no connection between the corporate transport unit and Children's Services. And Zoe is an effort to plug that gap. But the corporate transport unit itself still doesn't sit in Children's Services. It does other things. It does adults, for example. We just have to try and make that as seamless as possible. And Zoe has done a great deal to help with that. And we'll see her report later on. I think there was a big lesson learned from what happened in 2021. I am encouraged that it does seem to have been better this year than last year, considerably better, but obviously there is still a way to go. And we'll see in item 53 that one of the things this committee knows is a problem is the pressure on the budget, and some of that is laid bare in Zoe's report, which we'll get later on. But I am encouraged that things are better than they were, even if they're not perfect.
Yeah. So as Prue said, we will be revisiting this again in item 53. If there are no further questions or comments, then I'd like to thank Terry and Sarah, especially Terry, for coming along tonight, okay, and for presenting and answering, all of our questions. It's very, very, very much appreciated. And again, if you could pass back, in our discussion at the beginning of the meeting, you told me a little bit about the structure, of Send Voices. If you could please pass back, to, some of the key players and all of the respondents to these surveys our thanks. I think that's really, really important. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Of course. Graham, I wonder if you could just escort Terry out. Is that okay to do it? Is that okay? Wonderful. Thank you. You're a champion. Okay, so agenda item 51. Update from the executive member for Children's Services.
So I flagged up I was going to talk about 3 things, but 2 of them at least are going to be very brief. So safety valve was the first thing. The presentation has been made to the DFE, and the DFE kindly told us that we were not to talk about it anymore until we got the answer. So we don't know when the answer will come, but it'll be several weeks at least. And so that is all I can tell you about the safety valve. Those junk checks. I don't want to disobey the DFE, which will be rather difficult.
If I could just interrupt on that point, in our last meeting in November, Prue did give an outline which is minuted, okay, of what the safety valve is and what we knew, about it at that time.
That can give you, for Richard's benefit, about 20 seconds on what it is, but not the detail what's in it. So this is a programme in which the authorities which are having the most difficulty with overspending in their schools grant, particularly in the high needs block, which is the SEND spending. It's a government support programme which you get invited into, and you have to put forward some proposals for how you're going to get that spending under control. And in return for doing that, they will offer financial support of some form. It's generally a 5-year programme, and it's quite severe. And there's a second tier of it, which is something not called best, but yes, which is delivering. You don't get any money. So so you don't get any money, but you get some support, which actually in some ways is better because they haven't really helped us with the support side, but we've had to do all that bit ourselves. But it's this programme. So we've submitted our thoughts, our plans, our 47-page spreadsheet, which is part of their thing. I think it's 47 sheets, isn't it? Something like that, which is their template. And now we have to wait for them to say whether we've succeeded and we'll be accepted into the programme. So that's it. The second thing is also quite short. So we bid for 2 special schools in the summer for capital, part of the capital programme as part of preschool bids. And the outcome of that is due by the end of January, and we've got 2 3/4 hours left, and we haven't heard anything yet. So we don't know what the outcome of that is. It's not no and it's not yes, and none of them seem to have been announced. So it's just been a bit slower than they said. So we don't know whether we've got either of those schools or none of them or both of them. And then the third thing I said I was going to talk about was cost of living. So we had last time you had Emma Cantrell from First Days and Jake Morrison from CAB and talked about that. So I've got a brief update on that. So Sally Watkins, who's the Chief Operating Officer, I think that's her title now, and Rachel Bishop Firth, who's our exec member for Equalities, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty, have had a meeting with Emma subsequent to that. And Emma has produced some guidelines for schools on how to reduce the cost of the school day. And Sally Watkins's team is dealing with rolling that out to schools. It's a bit disjointed because you'd think that would fall to Children's Services naturally, but Rachel and I have kind of agreed that it's it sits better under the tackling poverty thing, although I do talk to schools about it myself. It's just one of those things. So they're aiming to identify 3 pilot schools later in the year and get this rolling. And that's quite an innovative thing for England. And Emma is also looking to open a second-hand uniform shop. So at the moment, she does help parents by supplying uniform. The people have, you know, second-hand stuff, but to actually have a shop. I know some schools do have uniform shops, but this is trying to be a more cohesive offering for use school uniforms. And that's probably the update on the cost of living side. But I think there's some hope that there's some initiatives coming. And obviously we are covering the free school meals, including the May half term. We don't know yet about government support for beyond Easter, but we're pledged to do that bit. We think there will be another tranche of government money. How much it will be, we don't know.
Good, thanks for that, Prue. Questions? Okay, Pauline, others?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Prue.
Okay.
I know we're all concerned that we don't have enough SEND places and we do need more SEND schools, which I know you're working on. There are 2 sites. I wonder whether you've considered them as possible sites for SEND schools. One is the old Farley Hill School in Farley Hill itself, and the other is on the Arborfield Garrison, where I believe there's a site already designated for a school, which may not be needed as a primary school. So have you had a think about those 2 sites as possibilities?
So it has been suggested that this site in Arborfield, which is, it's part of the core strategy, had various components that developers will be expected to supply when they did their development. And it has been suggested that the developer who's responsible for this particular bit of the Arborfield SDL would be willing to convert that into a special school. However, no discussions have been had with that developer at Transper. There's no indication that they actually are. And I don't know what difficulties we'd get into if we tried to convert it and it's not necessarily suitable anyway. So I think that one's a bit of a red herring. The Farley Hill site is under active consideration for being used. It's a shame to, the school moved, the site then had a caretaker on site. There are things about it that need fixing because it's not in a terribly good position, but it is under active consideration to provide some sort of facility. So yes. And hopefully we'll have some news of that fairly soon. I don't know whether Helen wants to add anything to either of those points.
Can I just clarify that we are on track to open the new SEND school in Winnersh in September?
We most definitely are, and we're delighted.
We in fact had a letter dated today which says that the DfE is very happy to announce that yes, it's supporting it to open in September. The only thing that I was very sad about is that the letter was dated today and it's sent to John Horsell, who is no longer the council. So the DfE could catch up a bit. But apart from that, yes, it's definitely on track. And I've been round it for others because it's in my ward, and they're getting on with it quite well and they're confident that it will be ready.
And Chairman, it will have fire sprinklers in it because we had a huge battle with the DfE to get them put in. And yes, it will, they gave way.
I have seen the plans with the sprinklers in and they've told me, yes, they're in. Yes,
yeah. And that's quite an achievement, so well done. So Sarah.
Yes, it's really exciting news that we've got a new school coming, and provision is a big thing. And one of the things that we worry slightly about is the commissioning of the provision. So regardless of whether we get the safety valve and moving forward is around getting that commissioning right for our SEND pupils so that they are accessible and the needs are met fully. And I'm slightly worried about some of the time lengths it takes to get the commissioning through and whether there's the support going in there.
Before Helen has a go at that, because the commissioning is a bit more technical than I can probably manage. The thing that concerns me is that we won't be quick enough, and other local authorities will put their children forward first, and we won't get all the places.
Sorry, it was broader than that.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Yes, I think I'll leave Helen to talk about the actual commissioning of it.
I think it's all tied in with safety valve and the capacity and resource that would come were we to be successful. So I think I'll just leave it there. Yeah, thank you.
I ask if the commissioning officers will get support around it, because it is a lot of commissioning work potentially, whether that's going to be strengthened then.
Again, we've got the work streams around safety valve would cover that off. Yeah. But we will, whether we're successful or not, we will be pushing forward with all of the programs that we have. Yeah.
Give you a political answer. The budget council is in 2 weeks' time, so just over 2 weeks' time, 16th of February. The papers will be published a week before, and the education and schools budgets and things will be all in there. But you'll be, the SEND IOP, the work streams in that are translated across, so we know that commissioning has not been developed as much as it should be in the council, and therefore we will be looking to strengthen commissioning across the board, not because they're no good at it, but because we don't have enough resource.
Sorry, and you're saying that is likely to be reflected in this budget?
Because whether we get approval for safety valve or not, we still have to do something about our SEND spending and our SEND improvement plan. And safety valve is as much, it is about the money, but it is also about demonstrating that whatever you do will produce improvement in the service as well. So we'll have to do the same sort of things, whether we in the safety valve programme or not.
Yeah. Well, it's good that we'll be facing that challenge, as part of the safety valve as well, isn't it?
It doesn't feel that good. It feels like a bit of a nightmare, to be honest.
Does anyone else have any other questions to Prue? Thank you very much, Prue. Much appreciated again. So agenda item 52, the education update. Sal, are you presenting that?
Yes, Chair, I am. Thank you, colleagues, for asking for this report to come to Children Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Hopefully, colleagues have had the opportunity to read through the report. So, given the pressures on time, I'm not proposing to go through it in masses of detail to leave time for discussion and questions. However, what the report seeks to do is give an overview of the local authority and children's services engagement across the broad education agenda. So not just the work that we do directly with and for schools, not just the work that we do and that we've already discussed in terms of the arrangements that we make for children with SEND and other vulnerable learners, but the variety of services and provision that the local authorities engaged in. So in my portfolio as the Assistant Director, I've got 10 key service areas. The virtual school, which acts as a champion for those children for whom we all are their corporate parent. It provides advice and guidance to professionals around the education for all children that have had a social worker or have a social worker, and also support unaccompanied asylum seekers through their education and ongoing development. We have an education welfare service that supports, that assists in supporting the attendance of children, but also responds to non-attendance. We are engaged in ensuring that we've got an approach that means that we understand those children that are missing in education and those children that are missing education. We also support and are beginning to work more closely with our electively home education community. as part of our education welfare service, and we know that what's coming there is a greater emphasis nationally on school attendance. We have a school improvement service that delivers against a variety of statutory responsibilities as well as system thematic areas in terms of support for schools and the support agenda. We've discussed today some of the elements that our SEND team support. We have our education psychology services, which include our mental health support team. And so those are mental health teams in schools. We have an adult education and need prevention service, so supporting young adults to be maintained in education, training or employment, as well as providing learning opportunities for our adult residents. We have an early years service that both works alongside our education, psychology and SEND services in terms of support of young children and infants with SEND, but also works more broadly with our nurseries, childcare settings and childminders. We're going to hear a report later around homeschool transport and from Zoe, who's our admissions and homeschool transport manager. And so we also have that service, so admissions that delivers and supports the admissions process on behalf of schools and the admissions authorities, and that point of liaison with SEND around homeschool transport and that broader liaison with CT, corporate transport unit around homeschool transport. We also have a responsibility around pupil place planning, and so that's ensuring that we've got the right level of school places, schools, both in terms of mainstream and special, and that generally tends to be very focused around both the numbers and capital development. And finally, we have CAMS Phoenix School, which is a hospital school that supports those young people referred into them via the Tier 4 mental health supports within the local and sub-regional hospitals. What this paper sets out to do is give you a sense of both the kind of large-scale strategic and political dimensions of the work as it relates to education. So our response to not only the current statutory basis, our rules of engagement, as it were, around education, but also being aligned to and alight to what's coming downstream in terms of the system. So we know we've had a big consultation around our SEND review, and we are awaiting the action plan as a result of that, which will reframe many of the areas that we work in and with our partners around SEND. We know that there was a white paper around education. Unfortunately, that's recently been postponed, but we do know that there are key elements of that are likely to go forward, again focusing around good teachers and around school attendance. We know that there is a broad move towards a academy trust-led system, school-led system over the years to 2030. So how we're working with our existing academies and our existing maintained schools around what does that mean for Wokingham. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on in the national environment that will influence what we do locally. There are also some key drivers for each of those 10 individual services. And again, rather than go through that in detail now because it's contained within the paper, I'm more than happy to take questions. But I think that one of the things that it's really, really important to note is that Wokingham, because of the commitment of our schools and our settings and our partners, is a very, very good place for children to grow and to learn. We know that there are areas where actually we can do better and that actually we need to continue to work to close the gap between our able population and our vulnerable learner cohort as well. So we know that there are areas that we continue to strive to do better in. But it is a good system that we have in Woking. We've got very strong schools, we've got very strong settings, we've got very good partners. And this is why we attract lots of children and families into the borough, which is great for a growing borough and a developing borough, but does provide us with some really significant pressure in terms of our broad education system, which is another one of those local drivers and challenges that we consistently have to address. I would like to ask the members of committee note the content of this report, and I'm more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Sal. And again, if you could pass on thanks to any others who are involved in actually producing what is a really, really useful document that I'm going to certainly be keeping on file because it shows the breadth and the depth, of the many varied activities, within the education service. It's a really useful document. I think, this is my own personal view, I'd be interested if anyone, has observations on this. I think that when it comes to the specific details, of each of these areas, most of that is addressed in our overview and scrutiny committee meetings, in our programme of work, as it were. There is one exception that I will draw people's attention to that I think, should be drawn attention to when we discuss the forward plan, but I won't reveal what that is, at the moment. So what I'm proposing, is that we, if people agree, avoid drilling down, into very specific questions about any of these 10 areas this evening, because, as I say, most of that detailed discussion, takes place. Overview and scrutiny takes place, in our routine meetings. Yep. Would anyone dissent from that? Anybody got a burning question? Are there any officers who would disagree with that? Okay, Graham.
I wouldn't entirely agree with what you've said there, because I think that it is a great document to share with our colleagues in council. One of the difficulties I had with my own party, let alone when I had an opposition, and I'm sure Prue's got the reverse situation, is getting people to understand the plethora of stuff that comes under children's services responsibility. And it is huge and deep. It's three-dimensional. As regards the document, it would be very useful to disseminate this with permission to colleagues on council. But I will make the observation, whilst it is a description of the 10 themes, there's a lot of negativity in it. What it isn't pointing out is where there are options available. They don't have to be detailed. They can be one-lined. And so to that extent, I don't feel that this document is entirely balanced. I'm quite happy to distribute it as it is, because I will put my own observation together with the distribution. But that's, maybe I'm prejudiced for having part of the job before. But if this was brought to me, that will be my observation in any event.
Come back to you on that in a moment. Okay, Anne?
Yes, I do have one or two questions I would like to ask, if that's okay.
If they are going to drill down into very specific items with any of these 10 themes, I would prefer not. Okay, the reason being, as I say, we provide very detailed overview and scrutiny of each of these as part of our as part of our routine programme.
Well, I would like to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay, because otherwise I'll have to sort of keep them stored up for a long time, and I don't think they're very lengthy.
Okay, let's try one. Okay, to see how we go.
Okay, thank you for that. So one thing is that there's the topic send 0 to 25 vulnerable learners service. That wasn't mentioned in the send survey as such. So is that something that parents are aware of? I mean, what is it?
Again, I think that pertains and picks up on a point that Sarah made earlier in and Terry in their presentation, in as much as actually that consistency of naming is something that we need to absolutely get on top of, because that refers to the SEND team.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Yes, that's good thinking about the consistency of naming. That's great. Okay, thank you. Okay, now this is probably a very quick question. The Adult Education Service and the NEET Prevention Team, I think that was in the Woodley Library, Wokingham Library. Where is it now? And how are NEETs in Woodley and Early supported?
So again, the arrangements for our support for NEET young people has changed, partly through or as a result of the different working arrangements that took place whilst we were part of the pandemic or in the pandemic, where much of our activity was moved online. So we now have an arrangement whereby we can contact young people and try and arrange for bespoke places where we can meet young people in order to have that kind of careers guidance and NEET support. So we don't tend to base our NEET services out of any specific buildings at this particular moment in time.
I see what you mean.
And if I can interrupt there, okay, NEET is one of the areas that we do scrutinise on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm not going to accept any more questions, I'm afraid, tonight. Your questions were forwarded, I think, to all the officers, and I hope that those that have not been answered, might receive a written response. Prue?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say a couple of things, not drilling down, but a couple of things that aren't in the report about some of these areas. So the virtual school for looked after children had a peer challenge review, voluntary thing in November, and came out of it fairly well, and a lot of enthusiasm from our schools and from the foster carers and all the people that are associated with it about the quality of its offering for supporting our looked after children. So that was really positive, and we have in fact had a virtual school governing body meeting this afternoon, which everybody was thanked for that, and we're looking at the plan. There were some areas for development, and those will be looked at, but it was acknowledged that it's doing a good job and has moved a long way. Unfortunately, Sian Biddlecombe, who is the virtual head, has just left the authority, and I think she's technically the deputy head, has stepped up to run it while we advertise for a new head. So, but the school has done really well and has come a long way. That's the first thing. Second thing is the Adult Education and NEET, as I announced in council, has had its Ofsted inspection and has been judged good, and that's really positive for us. Excellent. The third thing I wanted to acknowledge is the work that is being done on elective home education. So we have had an interesting relationship with some of the parents who look to that, but we've recently had a meeting with some representatives. I know that some of our staff has been sent on some training that was run at West Berkshire to look at elective home education and how we can deal with that better as professionals, because it's quite difficult if you're from an education and a schools background to deal with parents who prefer to do it their way, which is their right. So to try and get that across, and we're looking now at how we develop our relationship with that service to improve that. most parents are absolutely fine, but it's a bit like Send that there are some that you really need to engage with in a different way because they have the things are more deep-seated and difficult. But I'm hopeful that that is also going to go in the right direction. So there's a lot of movement in there, and it's not just sitting there doing the same old things. And I think we all know what the school improvement team does because Gillian will be doing her bit later on about school improvement.
Okay. I'm very conscious that Graham raised a matter, okay, relating to the potential to circulate this document more widely, possibly in a slightly amended form. Okay. Now, what I would like to propose, or would you like to make a proposal? Okay.
Yeah, can I suggest, Chair, that I'll accept the document as it is to be circulated because I think it gives a very good explanation of the 10 passages. What I would like to propose is that the next iteration of this document has for each of the sections a vision or a go-to objective. Just that.
Okay. I would personally be very happy with that. Do we have a seconder? Pauline, okay, all of those in favour of adopting that as a recommendation? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that's yeah.
The vision and objectives, because here's the recommendation to also circulate it.
The recommendation is to circulate it, the existing document, but that future iterations include, now the exact wording?
A vision and or objectives for each of the, what are you calling them? Divisions, parameters, themes?
The 10 areas.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Again, we'll need to run the wording for this recommendation in this instance between amongst Shirley, yourself and myself, if that's okay. Yeah. And
Chair, we did struggle with the format of this report. We had a very substantial document that got cut down in size. So actually having the opportunity to do this is helpful. Thank you.
No, and it's a very, very user-friendly document. As I say, I will certainly be keeping it sort of on file. So thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Sal. Item 53, the travel assistance policy. It's the implementation, of the travel assistance policy. Zoe's going to be introducing this in a moment, but I'd just like to sort of emphasise that the focus of this report is on the key outcomes of the revised home to school transport policies that came into effect last September 2022. And as has been said already this evening, it is part, of a broader programme of work to address wider systems issues such as SEND, sufficiency placements. So we've all had a chance, Zoe, to read through the report. Okay. We have had a couple of questions already, on it. Okay. If there are any things which you would like to particularly say by way of introduction or to emphasise, that would be good. Okay. Otherwise, we can go straight to questions and comments. Zoe.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll introduce the report. I think the overarching message really of this report is that the overall cost of providing home to school transport is rising, and I'm sure you got that from reading the report. It highlights that the cost to the local authority, was 4.1 million, and this could rise to over 5 million by the end of 2023. I think it's important to highlight that over the years, Children's Services has really striven to contain the transport overspend within the overall budget allocation. And it's been managed by protecting the budget during saving rounds, by redirecting funding where possible and using reserves to offset the overspends. And on implementing the changes to the most recent policy, this has led to the removal of the majority of the discretionary spending. And we've also carried out transport route management, which has also played a key part in ensuring effective use of resources. But there is this continued and additional pressure on the home to school, school and college transport budget. And this report really wanted to highlight not only the financial pressures the local authority is facing, but also the other contributing factors to the rising transport costs. I think, like Woking, and many local authorities have managed these pressures by reducing their local eligibility criteria for home to school transport towards a statutory minimum, which is what we've done and what the new policies have done. And they came into force this last September. And they were really developed to help parents, carers and professionals to more easily identify and apply the relevant eligibility criteria to applications and assessments, and really to ensure that the council's provision of homeschool and home to college transport arrangements were in line with its legal responsibilities and statutory duties. And I think the policies also better clarify the circumstances under which the council has no legal duties to provide travel assistance, because I think some of the older policies, perhaps weren't clear on those points. But I think it's also important to highlight that the community transport and children's services really do have stronger links in place now, with robust application processing controls and communication channels. There's obviously still improvements that we can make, but we're on the right path. And the new homeschool transport policy, like I say, has reduced the local eligibility criteria for homeschool transport towards the statutory minimum. And the report explains how that's been achieved, which you've obviously read. But I think it's really that the report seeks to highlight that due to the increase in demand for school places, the inflationary costs of transport, such as the fuel and driver wages, the lack of suppliers, increase in numbers of eligible students caused by inward migration into the borough, and the increase in the number of students with an EHCP, all these things are causing the costs of providing mainstream homeschool transport to increase, and particularly, for example, in the primary sector, which hopefully this report highlights. I just wanted to say that there have been some questions raised tonight about the operational side of home to school transport, and in particular the training of drivers and personal assistants. And I will raise those issues with the community safety team manager, and we will look to work collaboratively on developing any appropriate training and guidance. And I will take away that this evening, and I'll speak to the manager and see how we can move forward on those things. So that's it really. If you I'm opening up to discussions now, really.
Okay, questions, observations? Okay, Anne, and then Sarah.
Okay, thank you. So, sorry. So, in travel training, page 81, the last paragraph, it's saying it's talking about the local, the special schools possibly being asked to develop independent travel. How would that be envisaged to be implemented?
Yeah. Could I just interrupt on that one? You do say that there is work underway at the moment on the provision of an independent travel training program. Could we just have a quick update on where we're at with that?
Yeah, I think as I said in the report, we really haven't progressed that far at the moment on independent travel training, and that is something that we're working on for the future. And I think the report said as a suggestion that we might want to start with the special schools in terms of travel training, and that's really our starting point, and engaging with them as to what that would look like moving forward. But we're at the very early stages of this.
Actually, sorry, does that very last sentence mean independent travel or independent travel training? Because there's quite a big difference, isn't there? Do you see what I mean? You're talking about training, aren't you, in that paragraph? But
yeah, it's about developing, children, enabling them to travel more independently to school, and that will be independent travel training as part of that.
So yeah, so the word training is perhaps I've got confused by that. Oh yes, page. No, what? Hold on. Charging for transport for young people of sixth form age. Sorry, perhaps I don't want to ask about general sixth formers, do I?
Can I ask a question on you as a follow-up to the one you asked about training?
Yes. Oh yes, please do.
I just wondered whether the travel training could be extended to our mainstream cohort that receive transport, whether or not that's something we could look at and how that would help with the costs.
Sorry?
Yeah, I don't think we need to be specific about, the educational establishment. I think it's just, if someone has got a special educational need, regardless of what establishment they're attending, then we should look at providing that, definitely.
Any further on that, Sarah?
I'm just not aware of anyone. I think Optilis do the specialist travel training, but I'm not. Do we have anyone that could facilitate that for mainstream?
Yeah, we have looked at that. We're kind of at stages of looking at different providers and looking at who might be able to carry out that piece of work for us.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that Send Voices might be able to engage with the council on?
Yes, we already work with them.
Okay.
So
good. Anything else, Sarah?
Yes. So there's what page is it? It's page 87 of the entire report, and it's talking about post-16 children with EHCPs. They might have to pay, or they do have to pay towards their own transport, which is currently £785 per academic year. Is that what's happening now?
Yeah, well, that's always happened. Yeah, that's always been even in the old policies. We did have a charge for post-16 travel as a contribution to the transport that we provide for post-16 students.
Right. Yes, actually, a resident did mention that to me once. Yes, because obviously it's not quite the same as a sixth former who's not Send. Perhaps. But
okay, and if I can suggest these very specific informational questions, be dealt with via email. I believe that your questions have already been submitted to officers, and I'm sure that they.
No, not those ones. No.
Not those ones. Okay. Well, I'm sure that we're always able to engage with officers, and it might be more appropriate for those very specific informational type questions, to be asked in that form. Okay. Okay, so we now have Sarah. Did you have something extra?
I have got about 3 questions. If
Excellent.
That's right.
Okay.
The first one is around the pickup points on page 82 that was mentioned. We have looked at this historically, and I just wanted to know whether or not you have that historical data, why it was looked at and rejected previously, and whether or not you'll be looking at counterparts like Buckinghamshire, where it was reviewed and rejected, particularly around the SEN cohort.
I think the pickup points is something quite new to Wokingham, and at the moment we're only really sort of experimenting with the sort of mainstream students. And I think, if we were going to go down the route of extending that to children with SEND, then we would obviously do consultation on that and look into it. It was just something that was an idea really, rather than something that we were considering doing anytime soon. Because it's something that we've only just started doing for our mainstream students, and we will probably look to expand that further before we look at going down that route.
Just to warn you, that's likely to be very contentious. For example, who's going to be responsible for supervising the child at the bus stop? Is that the parent?
And
yeah,
you
there's
know,
lots.
who's going to be able to keep them
there's
safe,
lots to consider. There would be lots to consider before we made any decision on that.
Thank you. You also on page 85, sorry, say that 734 moved into the area. I just wondered, what was the average that moves into the area, and how are you able to plan for, with all the new builds, there must be a general population increase each year, and how excessive is it this particular year?
Yeah, so the number of children moving into the borough has, from the evidence we've got, increased significantly in the last 18 months. And this can be seen in the changes in the Wokingham school rolls, which is the data that we use. And just comparing the annual roll growth for all borough schools from January 21 to January 22, with the two preceding years, has seen that we really have had a growth, an annual growth in the roll numbers. The number of families moving into Wokingham from overseas, however, particularly the Hong Kong nationals, and obviously we've had the war in Ukraine, those sorts of things couldn't be predicted. We had no way of telling where these families would be relocating to within the UK, and it's those sort of unknown numbers that have really put the pressures on our places, and it's not something that we've been able to predict. So we really can go on only on roll numbers, but obviously the extra pressure of people of the inward migration is something that's very hard to predict.
Thank you. My last question then is on page 86 about the bow hunt school. I was just really curious, because that's a new build, why there are unsafe walking routes within the you know, and it's what, 122,000 I think you say it will be annually, and why that wasn't incorporated into the planning. That was my last question.
When we looked at the students for whom there's no safe walking route to bow hunt, they're not in the new build areas. These are older housing stock in the rural areas. And I think this is something that we need to look into further and really maybe assess those walking routes. Because, you know, the children that are going to bow hunt now are really, that this is affecting are in the old stock houses, not in the new builds. And it's not something that probably would have been picked up on as part of the planning. But it's something that we need to look at now, because it is a fairly significant cost. And really, you know, it's whether or not, you know, we can look at those safe walking routes and see how they can be made safe and what the costs are involved in making those routes safe, and how that might impact on the budget overall.
Thanks, Sarah. Shirley?
Thank you. Yeah, you've sort of answered part of my question, because I was going to ask what Sarah asked about collection points and send students. So you've answered part of it. But in general terms, has there been much resistance from parents to these sort of pickup points, or has that been reasonably well received?
Yeah, we didn't have any complaints actually. Certainly not formal complaints that have come my way. I mean, parents might not have been too happy with it, but certainly nothing has been raised formally, and we've had no formal complaints. And actually, the community safety team have actually said that they're actually running very smoothly now.
Yeah, no, that's good news. I think it's a really good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Graham?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's really an observation about Zoe. I mean, she's pulled together, you know, very disparate faculties. This has been a huge challenge for the borough as a whole, and she's always been very professional, very erudite, and has really pulled this together well. I watched it happen, and I'm sure Prue's seen the continuity that's happened over the last year or so. So, you know, I'd really like to say from my heart, what a great job you've done on what's a really difficult and sometimes dry and sometimes emotionally charged subject. Well done.
Thanks, Graham. Much appreciated.
And can we formally minute that, Liz? Because I'm sure that we would all echo that sentiment. Pauline?
Thank you. Yeah, the cost has been rising hugely year on year for many years. And one of the reasons was the number of SEND children that we had to send out of the borough. There will always be some that have to be, but we have begun to address that by expanding Addington and building the new school in Winnersh. And it is still part of the council's aspiration to build more in the borough. This document has, as Graham suggested, been a long time in the writing. It was actually begun when I was the exec member for Children's Services 3, 4, 5 years ago. I don't remember, many years anyway. But we're there, and so well done. I think it encompasses everything that we'd been thinking of during the years. What I'm going to say is, I still think more relevant to item 50. However, as I was asked to put it under item 53, I'll do it now. Given that the parents of the SEND children had 3 priorities, which were safety of transport, ensuring it's appropriate to the child's needs, and training for drivers and escorts, I would like to propose an amendment to the recommendation so that it reads that members note the content of this report and, I'll go slowly for Lucianne to write it down, and agree, A, that a written report be brought to the next meeting on what training has been done for drivers and escorts to support special needs children, and on communication with parents of special needs children, and B, that an annual survey for parents of SEND children on transport be done with the results brought to this committee.
Thanks very much, Pauline.
How did you do, Lucianne?
Yeah. That's really helpful to have that specific wording. With regards to the first part A, okay, could I ask for officer advice, because you were quite specific? You're saying brought to the next meeting
of this committee,
an outline of what training has been provided.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the next couple of months, really.
Okay. And what and how communications, have been made.
Mm-hmm.
Is that realistic to bring to the March meeting of this committee? Or would you be happy, Pauline, if we changed it at the next appropriate or feasible opportunity?
Really, Chairman, because the one after the March won't be until June or July. And I think that's far too long to keep this hanging about.
Yeah, thanks. I take that point. Yeah. So?
Yeah, if I can, I think because the liaison and the work with providers is undertaken by the corporate transport unit, I think that what we would need to do is afford them the opportunity to consider and think how they can best report in a meaningful way back to Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee about what activity has been done and what activity might still be able to be done. I think Zoe has committed to go back and have that conversation with the CTU manager specifically around training and the challenges that have been highlighted today. But before we could make a commitment on a report back, I think that we would have to have that conversation with the corporate transport unit, who are ultimately responsible for that particular element of the activity.
Sorry, Chairman, I can't really agree with that. Yes, I know it's a different department and it shouldn't be. It should be under Children's Services, but the powers that be believe that it shouldn't be. And I'm not asking for perfection. I just want to know what's been done by our next meeting. And we surely can do that from Children's Services, even though it's working with another department. We're not so silo-based that we can't.
Okay, I think we've made it very clear, that our hope, would be that this could be brought, to the March meeting. Okay, but we must recognise, that this is dependent, on input, from another part of the council. Are we happy to leave that? That's fine. Okay, and all those in favour of that? That's fine. And let's hope, that that something meaningful, can be brought, to the next committee. Okay, thank you, Sarah.
I just wanted to add that the transport survey is also shared with CTU, so they are fully aware of the parental feedback. So they have got that information as well.
Sorry, and I'd forgotten about the part B of the recommendation was the annual transport survey, which is being done by Send Voices now. And I think it was made, an argument was made that it's actually, there are advantages, in it being conducted by a group other than the council.
And that's already in the programme of work plan.
Exactly.
Annually.
Yeah.
I'm slightly not worried by the spirit of the recommendation. I'm worried by the wording, because we cannot order Send Voices to do a survey. So I think that we would recommend that the survey be done, but it just needs a slight tweak to the wording.
Yeah, that we continue to support, the annual Send annual transport survey. Yeah. Are we happy with that?
Yeah, I was about to say something similar that we don't want it to become the wording that Pauline was suggesting made it sound like it was going to be a council thing, and I think it needs to be a Send Voices thing, and it's quite clear that we support that, and it will come back to committee annually going forward.
It's really important to our family, so it is in our annual plan work.
Brilliant. Okay, and Shirley?
That was
the point. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, I would like to make a further recommendation on this agenda item, and the matter of safe walking routes, was raised. I'd like to keep my recommendation quite sort of open-ended in a sense, but I think it is a very, very important issue that I think we should draw the attention of the executive. So my recommendation would be that the committee expresses its concern to the executive at the significant direct financial costs to children's services of insufficient safe walking routes, including serving Bowhunt School. And I think that just adds a little bit more to weight, to arguments for promoting active travel, including for our young people. Sarah.
I was just curious around the cohort that goes to Bowhunt, because of course, early on, there would have been a larger catchment than there is now. So are those children going to sort of, in essence, time out of the catchment, and they would no longer be accessing Bowhunt as their main school? I think you'd need to know a little bit about the data and the population before you spend money.
Don't think that affects the recommendation. It's just drawing it to the attention of the executive to say, it is an issue, both financially, but also, for the welfare of our children.
Yes. So I just want to say one thing about that. I'm quite happy with that wording, because it's I don't want the most to fall on children's services, so that's fine. There have already been extensive works to provide a safe walking route for other people, for children that walked to Bowhunt already, which weren't planned in and caused all sorts of kerfuffle because of the state of 9 Mile Ride and the routes they had to take. That has been a significant cost to the council, and a lot of issues in Finchampstead Parish Council about what was the appropriate route and what was safe and what the lighting should be, and going through the woods and all sorts of other things. And really, those things should have been thought about when the school was planned. So I'm reluctant to give a pledge, but I will go as far as saying that if we are looking at schools in the future, then those things would be considered at an earlier stage.
That's the concern, that we want aired. Shirley?
pretty much going to say the same thing, and I wonder whether our recommendation could specifically say the executive member for planning as well as the executive member for active travel and highways to nail it down, because it clearly is a planning issue. There's something gone seriously awry, and going forward, as you say, with other schools, we don't want the same thing to happen.
So is the issue not where people live more than where they go to school? Because presumably these people were going to school at Embrook, say, before and getting a bus anyway. So I think I'd want to know a bit more about the actual longer term stuff, because the issue probably isn't the school, it's the other end.
You have opened up a very, very complex matter for discussion. Yeah,
I'm allowed to say this at the first meeting.
Yeah, no, and it is, in all seriousness, it's a massive concern, and one which we do scrutinise, under the heading of school sufficiency. I think it is, but absolutely, see where you're coming from on that. Unless anybody else would like to say anything more on that. Okay, but well spotted, Richard. Okay. Okay, item 54 then, the forward programme. We have the Send Youth Forum item still not scheduled. Okay, I'm wondering, I am very conscious, that we do have excessively complex, long and complex agendas, and try as hard as we do, we are struggling, to reduce the number of agenda items. However, I think that there would be enormous benefit, in us being able to engage with the Send Youth Forum, and I'm wondering whether we might ask whether they might be available at the next meeting, which is the 22nd of March. How do people feel about that?
Send Voices don't look after the Youth Forum. That's what is it? Yes, something. Yeah. Which is run by Me Too. I think I sent you the details last time.
Me Too.
So
Okay.
Ramona is the one that looks after them.
Try again.
Okay, if she doesn't respond after the second one, let me know and I'll nudge her for you.
Thanks. Okay, so if you can follow that up, Lucian, that would be wonderful. Okay. Earlier this evening, okay, there was been a couple of references to the impacts of poverty, the cost of living crisis on children, and of course we had the excellent engagement with representatives from the Hardship Alliance at our last meeting. We made quite a number of recommendations at that meeting. I think it was 7 recommendations in total. I think that we ought to schedule, probably not for March, okay, but perhaps the next available meeting after that, an opportunity to get an update on where we're at with some of those recommendations, what sort of new challenges, have emerged. I'm wondering also, and responses, I'm wondering also, whether we might be able to structure that in a way that would enable some of our youth council representatives, to participate as well. Any thoughts? Okay, I think because this is I believe this is such an important item, could I suggest that we tentatively consider this for the next meeting after the 22nd of March? I'm not sure when that will be. I think someone said it might be June, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Right. And I also would like us to consider in the forward programme, again, probably not, until maybe the June meeting at the earliest, but there is in the new white paper, there is now a requirement for local authorities to support all schools with attendance issues. Now, I know that we have looked at this, okay, and before the new requirement came into effect, okay, but I think it would be good for us to get some sort of feedback, on how this is progressing. June might be an appropriate time, or it might be better, to consider it maybe after 1 year, of implementation. Would people be happy, in principle, for this to be brought, as a overview and scrutiny item? Graham?
Just a question really to Sal or Helen. I don't know if the schools are compelled to give us that data, are they? I got a feeling we've had some discussions before, and in the back of my head, it was an issue when we were looking for COVID absences.
Yeah. So what's happened is that there was a white paper that was going through its motions, and part of the key element within that was around attendance. As a result of that, some non-statutory guidance was issued to, in essence, ask local authorities to set up school attendance services, so a development of our education welfare service, and to provide support services to all schools, regardless of their type. Previously, we had only had a statutory responsibility to support local authority maintained schools, and therefore traded education welfare services with academies and free schools. What this non-statutory guidance did was say, well, actually, don't bother trading. We now expect you to work with all schools. Part of that is an expectation that all schools share attendance data. Now, a complicating factor is the fact that the white paper has now been, to all intents and purposes, shelved at a government level. However, the DfE and ministers are still clear that certain key elements of it they are likely to bring forward in terms of legislation going forward. And I think one of those key areas, and they've indicated that one of those key areas will continue to be that focus around school attendance. So regardless of the fact that the white paper has been postponed or put on hold, there will be a responsibility for us to make these arrangements and to work with our school partners around attendance, understanding the data so that we can act early in supporting better attendance. We know that the DfE are also going to be requiring schools to share with them their attendance data on a much more frequent basis. So you're absolutely right, Graham. It was not required previously in the way in which it is likely to be required going forward.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation, Sal. It seems to me that everything that you've just said would justify, inclusion of this as an overview and scrutiny item at an appropriate time, which we can determine with officers. Is there Sarah on this point?
On attendance, it does fit. It's unfair for some pupils, predominantly if they've got medical appointments to attend, and some schools will grant you permission to, some schools won't. Attendance isn't always necessarily recorded in a fair way for the SEND cohort, and I think I know that there's big government push for high attendance levels, but it does disproportionately and can alienise a lot of our families. So I think I would like a little bit of a caveat. If you're going to collect that data, you do need to also be really mindful of how many of those are SEND pupils.
I think that's a really important observation. Okay, still on this issue, Graham?
Yeah, I'm really just seeking to clarify that what I'm trying to do is set the expectancy for the scrutiny group, that this sort of information won't be instantly available, because everything that Sal says is absolutely right. But whether the 10 secondary academies come to that conclusion within the next 18 months, who knows?
You're absolutely right. That's one of the reasons why we'll need to seek advice, on when best, to bring this before the committee, with the kinds of caveats, warnings, that Sarah has illustrated, very, very clearly specified. Okay, does anybody else have any other items for the forward programme?
We short while ago passed a resolution that we would need an update on the progress on the send transport issues, so that needs to go on the March forward programme.
Sorry. Okay, Ming? Hello,
Thank
Ming.
you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to comment on attendance bit. I know the boss already said. Yeah, being someone new, thank you very much. Give me the opportunity. I try to keep quiet because I'm really new. Yeah, I think it's important to talk about attendance. Member and same voice colleague already said it linked to many other things. Attendance, not just attendance. It doesn't matter it's white paper or not. My colleague Saul already said that also there's some good practice, not necessarily because white paper require us to do that. That means I think we need to identify what are our core services. Let's go out to support school and also enable school, empower school to do what they need to do in school. I think that it's justifiable for this item to bring back to be tabled in the future. Just would like to say that.
Thank you very much for that, Ming. Okay. Good. Any other items for the forward programme? Okay. Well, moving on. Item 53, exclusion of the public. Now, I do need to read out the standard statement, and then we will end the live streaming of this meeting. That under section 100A, Stroke 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act as amended as appropriate. So if we can confirm that the live streaming has ended.